Good evening and welcome to the February 23rd work session of the Hillsborough Town Board of Commissioners, which also is serving as budget workshop number 2 as we work through our budget process. Are there any changes to the agenda?
I will add item 4D, which is the special event permit that we received this afternoon from Sarah.
Thank you, Matt. Any other changes? Your motion to accept the amended agenda? Oh, Sarah?
Just one correction, that I emailed earlier for the tourism board appointment, that should be the Tourism
TDA.
Development Authority.
TDA. Very good. Thank you.
Apologize for that.
Move to approve the amended.
Second.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Megan. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And moving on to number 3, appointments to the Tourism Development Authority.
I move to reappoint Victoria Pace and Megan Darrow, for terms expiring January 31st, 2027 to the TDA.
Second.
Thank you, Kathleen. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And on to item 4, items for consent agenda decision.
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
Thank you, Kathleen, thank you, Matt. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving right along. And Matt, for clarification. Special event permit. Is that for the consent agenda? or for-
Consent. So,
On to number 5, item A, request for funding to support Casa Cedar Village project. Matt,
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to introduce Cornelis Kirk. He's the Director of Real Estate Development for CASA, who is the project applicant. He'll go through a description of the project and the request, and then if you all want to discuss funding, if that's something you're interested in, I can run some budget options. So, Nelson.
good evening, welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for entertaining our request. My name is Cornelis Kirk. I'm Director of Real Estate Development at CASA. And have submitted a request for funding for our Cedar Village Park project, which I'm sure you guys most of you are familiar with, but I can give a brief overview and why we're making this request. Cedar Village is 72 unit planned project, half 1-bedroom units, half 2-bedroom units. We are planning to apply again for low-income housing tax credits. We've done so the last 2 cycles and we're unable to apply in 23, which I'm happy to go over some of the obstacles we ran into a little further along. We'll be setting aside 24 of the 72 units for individuals and families earning less than 30% of the area median income, which if that was a 1-person household in this area, that'd be a maximum of $24,300 a year. 26 units at 50% of area median income or less. So if that was a 1-person household, that'd be about $40,000 per year. And then the last 22 units would be at 60% of area median income. So that would be around $64,000 per year. We'll also be working with some of our supportive service and referral partners, including the VA, their homeless services program, to get referrals for veterans. And we'll also be working with Veteran Bridge Home, who's another supportive service partner that we work with to provide housing for veterans. And we'll also be working with the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness, and I've already put this project on their radar for coordinated entry. We partnered with them on our most recent low-income housing tax credit project in Chapel Hill at Perry Place, as well as some of our other projects that we've been operating for the last couple decades. Let's see what else we've got. I guess I should go into an explanation of what's happened the last couple of years. The low-income housing tax credit process is extremely competitive. The first year where we attempted to apply was in 23, due to the parcel being landlocked at the time and not having an access easement with D.R. Horton at the time. They could not donate us the parcel, and per the advisement of their attorney, they did not want to enter into a donation agreement with us. So we were not able to show site control to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, who allocates the credits, and could not apply. And in 24 and 25, we ran into the same issue where you can only have 1 project in the same county awarded for low-income housing tax credits in any given year. And the tiebreaker, both ourselves, our project, as well as 2 separate projects, one in each year in Chapel Hill, also had a perfect site score. And the tiebreaker at the time was who has the most non-North Carolina Housing Finance Agency money in it. The first year, I mean, we've secured 825,000 and 247,000 in two separate grants from Orange County. Fortunately, the town of Chapel Hill put just a little bit more money the first year for a for-profit low-income housing tax credit developer. And then in 25, another nonprofit affordable housing developer got a significant amount of money from the town of Chapel Hill. So we were beat out both of those times. I've talked with town of Chapel Hill staff. There are no projects that are applying in Chapel Hill this year. And they've actually changed the tiebreaker, that would be the first applicable one, to being who has the most units. Being that we were planning on 72 units and nobody else in Orange County should be applying, that puts us in a much more, competitive place this time around. Some other obstacles that have come up though, given some just changes in the economic political climate, there is something called price equity that has gone very far down. When we apply for the tax credits, we end up having, they do nothing for a nonprofit. We have to sell them to investors. Most of the time, they're very large banks. Our last project in 23, we were getting around 87 cents on the dollar, 88 cents on the dollar. It's now down, having spoken with equity syndicators, it's more like 80, 81 cents. So that results in hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost equity when you're getting that much less pricing. So it was $15 million that you got in tax credits, which is the max you can apply for. Now we're looking at getting about 12 million, whereas earlier it could have been over 13 million. The total project budget is right now, we're looking at 17.67 million, what we're estimating. And that's based on updated proposals and keeping in contact with our general contractors that we'll bid the project to. And another issue is that the General Assembly has completely wiped out what was called the Workforce Housing Loan Program, which a lot of tax credit developers use that as gap financing. And so there's going to be considerably more pressure on what is left of the rental production program, another gap financing program for low-income housing tax credit developers. And it's stated in the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency's qualified allocation plan. And I apologize for throwing all these things in the weed out there. So let me know if you want clarification on anything. But they've stated that they could decline your application if you're asking for too much of any kind of gap financing, which is what has brought us to this request of funding with the town of Hillsborough.
I mean, can you repeat? You were saying D.R. Horton did not, you were saying they did not, quote unquote, donate?
They did donate the land eventually.
Okay,
In 2023, when the parcel was landlocked and they couldn't actually donate the property to us, we tried to work with them, and for a couple of months, we're going back and forth to see if they would enter into a donation agreement so that we could show to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency that we have site control, and at some point, the property would be donated. They did not want to enter into that agreement with us, and so we couldn't apply that year. They did at the last second in January 24 donate the property right before the pre-application deadline. So we were able to apply in 24 and 25.
okay, what was the reason for not to? Because whoever owned that property absolutely was supposed to donate.
Yes, I know, and town of Hillsborough board made sure that happened. We're very grateful for. It was per the advice of their their lawyer, their attorney, that they should not be, because to them, if I remember correctly, it's been a few years ago, that their contractual agreement was with the town of Hillsborough, not with CASA, so that they did not have to enter into a donation agreement with us. They would donate the land to us as soon as they were legally able to.
Oh, okay,
So,
gotcha.
yeah.
If I recall correctly, there was the parcel that was intended had power lines.
Yeah, the
back
power,
there.
I knew about the power line.
That started the
That was the original.
change in location.
Yes.
Yeah,
That was, yeah, I'm not sure, I don't remember what year that was, but the original intended parcel, which honestly would have been a better location, had the power lines over it, which would be an automatic disqualification for applying for tax credits.
Well, can I ask a question?
Yes.
And that is, given the total budget for the project, it seems like $300,000 in the town is not a significant amount of money overall. Is this action, is it really going to be actionable for you?
Yes,
Is it going to make that big of a difference?
yes, it will mean that we do not have to rely on, or not have to rely on as much rental production program money, which everyone is going to be asking for since the General Assembly removed the workforce housing loan program. And it's the difference, it's a lot of marginal numbers, and it's a lot of what's the difference between your debt coverage ratio being 1.1 and you don't qualify, and getting it up to 1.15 where you do.
Kathleen, can I interrupt? Let's let others ask a question first. Matt, do you have any questions?
So what I'm hearing is, that any funding from us actually has multiple uses. One, diversifies your revenue stream. That also looks good for the tax credit. And I'm sure it also looks good to have the local government with some skin in the game. Even if it's not a large amount relative to the whole project.
All of those points are correct, yes. And the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency really likes it when the local governments have skin in the game, like you said, and decreases the burden on them to provide as much funding. Absolutely.
Is that good?
Megan?
I didn't have any specific questions, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any more questions. Well, no, I see some questions. Kathleen?
I have a bunch of questions. So, how are your plans stacking up against what's expected to pass with either 21st Century or Road? Especially with the finance side, the bank investment expecting to go from 15 to 20%. Some of the deregulation on the requirements on the environmental, some of the, just a bunch of areas. How is that expected to impact cost to the 17.6 mil?
So we've already built into the project the fact that now we're taking into account 2021 IECC standards, which I don't remember exactly what that stands for, but it's updated, energy standards. Project is already going to be built to Energy Star standards. So a lot of that was already factored in earlier pricing that we had. But we've worked with two general contractors that have done other projects for us to continually give them updated plans and have them provide us updated pricing on everything. As far as deregulation of environmental standards.
Because if there's a recent, this won't qualify because it's larger, but, they're still doing some streamlining. I'm not so concerned with that. We want environmental and strong. My focus is really more on now that the banks are going to have greater percentage for community reinvestment by a good 5%. That is a heck of a lot of money to go flow into our communities. I would anticipate that would be beneficial. Some of the other financing changes that would, because they are focused on unit creation, I would anticipate that CASA would stand very well from. Granted, it's, the passage isn't yet, but with the bipartisan support, it's expected one or both will go through. I would anticipate 21st Century since it's got so much overlap.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how that will impact the overall financial picture.
So as of right now, one of the biggest things with the CRA is equity pricing, and it hasn't seemed to help that at all. As I mentioned before, it's much lower than previously, or at least from 2020 to 2025. We have been shopping amongst several different larger banks, First Citizens, First Horizons. We have equity syndicators like Boston Financial shopping this around. So we're going to try to get the best terms possible to get lower interest rates, better amortization, longer terms.
And Federal Home Loan Bank's not providing any?
So FHLB, we actually just won a grant from them for a project in Chapel Hill. This specific one did not score well with FHLB Atlanta or FHLB Pittsburgh. So we did not apply.
What about Des Moines?
I did not check that out. I can look and we can still potentially apply, though the cycle would be, I don't think the next cycle opens up till June, which would be too late for this. Generally speaking, most of their scoring rubrics are very similar. They'll tweak things here and there, but they're overall pretty close. And we were scoring in like the 50s on this, just based on their rubrics. And from my understanding, you usually have to have a score in the 60s to even be competitive. But we have looked at FHLB.
All right. That's all for right now.
So how would the board like to kind of consider this? It seems like since we're working on our budget, I'm not sure that we want to make a decision at this meeting right now, or maybe you do. Yeah, because it's a very impactful for our affordable housing strategy and our budget process, which is not going to conclude for several more months. So you're asking at the time where we're still weighing and balancing and trying to figure out what we're going to do. So what's the general feeling of the board? Do you want to go ahead and make a decision on this tonight, or do you want to take time to consider it with the rest of the other budget, which we haven't heard yet? Matt,
Two questions. The first is, what's your deadline?
May 15th, we would,
15th.
is the deadline for the full application. And I mean, it would be great to still have it afterwards, but it would completely change the way we're applying, because unless you actually have an award letter, they're not gonna consider it funding.
That dovetails directly into my next question. Do you need the commitment or the dollars actually in your bank when you apply?
Just the commitment, I mean, Orange County, I mean, they've done the environmental review process for their funds that they've, committed to us. We're not gonna see that till around the time construction starts. And I guess one other thing I would bring up is it would be best to have it structured as a loan, as opposed to like a grant that's just given, even if it operates like a grant, it would,
Like we could just forgive the loan.
yeah, if you wanted, or deferred payment for the life of operating the property as affordable housing. It is already tied up to be affordable housing for 99 years, and I'm sorry.
No, that is allowable if the board wanted to pursue that. That is how the other local governments in Orange County are also structuring their agreements with nonprofit housing providers. So it's not outside of the norm. We would bring back a loan agreement for you all to approve if that's something you wanted to pursue.
well, Matt, don't go far because it sounds like maybe you provided some additional information in the packet about what that means for our affordable housing budget and strategy going forward. Do you want to comment on that? And
Sure, I can
walk us
pull up,
through the information in the packet?
So this is sort of where we left things off at the end of last fiscal year. This includes the addition of FY 29, which would be the third year of our new budget. And the only other item I've added is we already know what the community home trust expansion request is. And so what this shows is for the current fiscal year we're in, we spent down a good portion of our affordable housing funds. We have commitments to Almond Village over the next 4 years. But you can see because of the additional affordable housing funding provided in each subsequent year's budget, you're starting to build additional capacity. And so this is sort of the no rise budget. This no change from where you left things last year. Yes, Commissioner Weeks.
Just hearing what we heard earlier about commitment letters and that sort of thing, and the likelihood that funds would go out before the end of the fiscal year is maybe pretty narrow. Is there any reason just to not have that deficit there, just move that first 100,000 to FY 30
For
that first year with the?
Almond Village.
Sorry, I was looking at I'm looking on my screen with CASA funding
Okay.
part.
Yeah, and we can get to that one in just a
So
second.
I'm thinking ahead, sorry.
Okay, so this was the baseline that shows you what capacity you would have in our 3-year budget that we're currently reviewing. And then if you layered in another multi-year agreement for CASA over 3 years, this is what it would look like. You still have some capacity growing over the next few years. This does not include the proposed Affordable Housing Fund contribution you all heard on Thursday night from a different development. So that would be additional funding that would be provided to this. And I'll defer to Cornelis on, whether or not pushing it out of year matters for them. So funding would start.
Well,
essentially in
this scenario,
FY 20.
my question is completely null and void, so.
Okay.
No,
I mean, pushing it out to start in FY 28,
no, this is exactly what I was envisioning.
Okay,
because this would work very well. I mean, if we would find out about being awarded in August, September of this year. And then, we would have to go through the whole plan review process with the town of Hillsborough and Orange County. And so, I mean, I think that timing would be perfect for the project.
Oh, I did have one other question. When this was originally put in, the goal was for 88 units and we've seen it's dropped to 72. Can you address that? Because it's a loss of that many units is meaningful.
One of the biggest reasons is the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency's obsession with parking. We tried to get a waiver from them. Now, the gentleman who declined it and loved parking he's now retired, so we could try it again. But, they would not allow us to drop. We tried to get a waiver for parking and to have more space on the site. As it is now, it's about as tight as it can be, and the building footprints, because of some energy efficiencies changes and now being built 2x6s instead of 2x4s, they've even got a little bigger, so the space is, it's pretty tight on that
So
site.
with 21st Century and Road both, it's done away with parking minimums, and they're from, if you want federal funding, would that impact that?
The only way that I was told that they would grant us a waiver is if the local, code will require a maximum number that was less than their 1.75 per unit. For every unit, we have to provide 1.75 spaces.
Because for some reason, I thought that the HIC got federal funding in addition to state, at which
For
point,
which project?
I mean, just in general, I just thought that their pool of funding, that they received money from the feds.
Oh, DHIC, yeah, they get federal
Because
funding.
that's one of those things they would have to do away with the parking minimums. That's part of that 21st century.
I could look into it. I'd be happy to look into what
Because it
DHIC.
hasn't passed yet, but
Yeah.
it's,
I can look at, DHIC, is this for previous projects they've already put in place or?
no, this is new money.
Okay.
coming in.
Okay, and because they're, I don't know if they have any projects this cycle that they're applying for. Or if they were able to get a waiver for previous ones, but
I mean, I'm just thinking it might be just to get a temperature check, given what's playing and what's likely. I mean, something's going to pass.
Mhm.
We're just, who knows what.
yeah, I understand. I don't think they'll give us, we can try it again, but I don't think they'll give us a waiver prior to May. Maybe they will, but the fact that they can fit those number of parking spaces on there, at least that we've shown it, because we did it up, just making it work anyway, they probably will not give us a waiver from that. Unless it was in the town of Hillsborough's UDO that the maximum number of spaces was 1 per unit or something like that.
Okay, because that's something that personally I want to see if we can get more units.
I understand. It would be great to get more units. With more units, we would also need to get more funding as well. Just because the costs won't go up proportionally that high because there's site work and all the other development costs. But we would probably need to find additional funding to be able to fit that.
I'd like to ask a question about that, maybe to Matt, and that is, so when I was new as a commissioner 10 years ago, this is one of the very first things that came to us. I don't recall offhand nor find in the packet how many housing units were approved. I think there was a range.
It was 88.
And so if they're not offering to build that, is there anything that the town board needs to do to accept that change?
No, the master plan for Collins Ridge, only required the donation of the land. Cedar Village doesn't have a site plan, approval, and so there's not anything currently that ties the number of units.
Thank you.
I do want to add just to Commissioner Ferguson's questions. They're great inputs, but that legislation hasn't passed, and with the rulemaking timeline, it's not going to apply to this funding cycle in any event. Next funding cycle is when we would see any impacts from those bills.
I know it hasn't passed yet.
Yeah. So what are your feelings about the budget and kind of what we were thinking about doing and the timeliness of the request?
Yeah, I think because of the timeliness, it's gonna be way before we pass a budget. They need a little bit more certainty now. For me, looking at the numbers that have been presented, not overall, it doesn't really. It does change the overall funds remaining by 100,000 each year, but for me, it creates units. It gets this project competitive. I would be fine with whatever. I'll leave it to our lawyer what specifically we need to do. But I would be comfortable with going ahead and doing the 100,000 for those years.
Thank you. Megan?
Looking at. What did I write on my computer? Looking at the chart that was developed here, The increase in FY 27, that the increase that we start having really does make it easier to. We don't have a deficit every year. It does change what we need to look at for future and what we might have wanted to do, but I agree, it creates units that we need for a population that needs these units. I think with what we're seeing here on the chart, I would be okay passing that.
Thank you. I don't get to vote on this, but I agree with those sentiments and I really appreciate saying that 24 units for 30% or below. That is very neat. Right.
Yeah, I'm absolutely comfortable with allocating $100,000 for the next 3 fiscal years. I think this project is important and I'd love to see us be able to help kind of move it forward, get it off the ground. So yeah, I'm more than happy to
Thank you. Kathleen,
Absolutely, get her done.
is there a motion to?
Move to approve.
Sorry, Kathleen. Thank you, Rob. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank
very
you
much.
so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Is Jess still with?
No, she works, she's the assistant director of housing at the city of Raleigh now. She got, Kings Ridge was kind of her baby that she wanted to see through, and that was placed in service, and after 17 years, she was ready for a change.
I'm here as well. If you run across.
I will, thank you so much.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, item B, water and sewer rate structure discussion. Emily. Welcome.
Yeah. So a while back, the board had requested that we explore some alternative water and sewer rate structure options. And so we contracted with Beth Tellis to do that analysis for us. And they are here tonight to go over some alternatives that they have developed and to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, I will turn it over to Melissa and Nessa.
With Emily.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Vanessa Bryant with Raptalis, and I'm joined by our water and sewer rate study project director, Melissa Levan. And we're both here to answer questions as we move through the discussion. I know a lot of this will be pretty new information. I think it's been about a year since we were before this town board. So I will definitely update you on the progress with our water and sewer rate study. And Emily, I'll just ask you, did you want me to share the slides that you had pulled up? I wasn't sure if there was a certain PowerPoint you had already, or I got them printed out. I can do that too, but
Yeah, pulled up.
yeah, just wanted to make sure before I not the most technically savvy, so perfect. Awesome, thank you so much. All right, so in the interest of time, I'll just do a brief overview of kind of the financial situation for both utilities. And then we'll do more of a deep dive into rate structure ideas or rate design ideas. So in terms of financial, kind of the study context that we started with, there were several objectives we had when we started this effort several months ago. First and foremost is, of course, making sure that the water and sewer utilities are financially sound. And there were a couple of challenges that the town was faced with, one of which was just rising costs overall. This is certainly an industry-wide trend in the water and sewer industry. The rate of inflation has been relatively high for water and sewer utilities. We're facing some pretty high capital costs. And on top of that, the town was also faced with a loss of grant funding on a couple of these capital projects. So that was a big consideration. Then, of course, with Tropical Storm Chantal hitting in the summer, we had some unexpected repair needs that the utilities were impacted by as well. So keeping an eye on rising costs and managing that. Along with that, we were really focused on financial metrics. As most of you may be familiar with, the town is issuing bonds to fund the Adrian F. Thompson building renovation. So that's about $8.5 million in bonds, and we had to focus on making sure we had enough revenue coming in from the utilities to fund the debt for that upcoming issuance and also maintain a strong debt coverage ratio. So I'll talk a bit about that. And finally, and kind of the focus for tonight is looking at some ideas for alternative rate structures. So this was something that came up in discussion. There was interest in exploring, are there some other ways to structure the water and sewer rates to really maximize fairness and affordability for customers and also make sure that customers understand their bill really well. So that was another focus point we had. But on the financial side, just to start off, so as mentioned, higher costs than expected. I think we are about 10% higher than what we projected about a year ago. Of course, tropical storm was not anticipated a year ago. Sometimes that happens where you project costs that are not quite what they end up being. So total operating expense has trended about 20% higher this year as compared to last year. So we had to kind of revise our long-term planning. We were initially still expecting to do a 7.5% rate adjustment for water and sewer rates this year. And we're sticking with that, but rather than dropping it back down to 6% per year, we're kind of looking more at keeping that 7.5% in the next several years, just to make sure again that those metrics are solid. We want to make sure for this debt issuance coming up for Adrian F. Thompson that we maintain a debt coverage ratio of at least 1 times. And the town is currently projecting that we'll be over that, about 1.1 in that vicinity. But because we don't want it to drop too low, we're definitely sticking with, the plan being 7.5% per year in terms of rate adjustments for water and sewer rates. So that's kind of the big picture. Operating expenses, this is really a big driver of cost. You have your personnel expenses, utilities, chemicals, et cetera. And this is somewhat flexible. I know last fiscal year, we were able to get a little bit of a reduction in these by the end of year. There was a shift in the general fund cost allocation. So sometimes our budget is a little bit higher than what actually gets spent. And we are hoping that may well be the case this fiscal year as well. But we are on the side of being a little bit conservative because of that debt coverage ratio, wanting to make sure we are at least above that minimum threshold. And, if we compare our previous projections, we were projecting about 10.5 million this year. We're coming in closer to 11.9 million. So that's about a 13% increase over what we had projected before. So we're, keeping that in mind, needed to keep up with cost. On the capital side, not a huge shift in the capital spending, although there are some larger debt payments forecast out in the 2030s that we have to think ahead for. We usually recommend doing gradual annual rate adjustments as opposed to waiting until the debt actually starts and then, doing a 20-30% rate adjustment that is typically a big shock to customers. So that's why we look out into the future. At the moment, the town has about $2.1 million in debt they have to pay off each and every year for those utilities. And with this capital plan, we're talking about adding an extra 1 to 2 million per year to that. So roughly doubling it by the end of this 5-year window. And as mentioned, Adrian F. Thompson renovation, that's a big chunk of that. There are some other projects coming up too that we want to just be prepared for. So that's why we're really focusing on the rate structure and thinking ahead to be prepared.
This is a dumb question. What is SRF?
State revolving fund.
Thank
The
you.
loan fund.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Absolutely. So yeah, that's a different type of debt, typically a lower interest and more kind of cost-effective debt option.
I just
But-
couldn't figure out, I just wasn't coming up with what it was standing for.
Of course, yes, and please feel free to chime in with any questions as we go through this. So I know we're kind of used to the jargon and sometimes I will say something and realize, oh, that maybe wasn't in plain English. So please don't hesitate. Yes. Okay, so as mentioned, to keep up with these costs, we're looking at a 7.5% rate adjustment. And this is just a visual of your existing rate structure. So you have a minimum charge that includes the first 2,000 gallons of water consumption. basically this minimum charge is you take your volumetric charge per 1,000 gallons and you multiply it by 2, or representing the 2,000 gallons that's included. It's the minimum bill that you're allowed to have. You can't, even if you use only 1,000 gallons, you still have to pay for 2. So over to the left, that's the minimum charge. Currently, it's 24.78 for water, 34.88 for sewer. And with that 7.5% increase, that goes up to 26.64 and 37.50 respectively. Similar kind of trend with that increase applied to the volumetric charge. That is applied, that charge, to every unit of 1,000 gallons after the 2,000. So if you use 3,000 gallons, you would pay for that minimum charge, and then you'd also pay the 12.39 for water and the 17.44 for sewer. All right. So just a little context there. And then again, a little bit more terminology. Just wanted to make a distinction between minimum charge and account charge. The town currently has a minimum charge structure. So what this means is that your minimum bill is based on the volumetric rate. You take the allowance, which in this case is 2,000 gallons, and you multiply your volumetric rate by 2 because the rate is assessed per 1,000 gallons. So 2 times that volume rate, that's equal to your minimum charge. It is the smallest bill you can possibly have. On the right-hand side, the account charge concept, this is an alternative we've been reviewing with town staff. This is completely decoupled from how much you're using. It's unrelated to the volume rate. It is a fixed fee, and it would be just a flat fee regardless of how much you're using it. It would be tacked on in addition to charges for the volumetric component. And really, both of these conceptually are trying to pay for fixed costs that are there regardless of how much you use. And these will be things like customer service costs, billing costs, anything that's just kind of flat, regardless of whether you're a high volume water user or you only use 1,000 gallons per month. Everyone still has to get a water bill in the mail, or maybe electronically these days, but billing, customer service, those are there for everyone.
Doesn't fixed fee include, I mean, because I know it covers customer service and billing, but it doesn't also cover a basic fixed fee of just infrastructure?
So that's a good question. It kind of depends on the rate structure. There are some rate structures that will have a fee component called a readiness to serve component, which would be in addition to the account charge. And that typically is related to the size of your water meter. We did actually, as a side note, we did look at that structure for the town, and we kind of ruled it out fairly early on because of how much burden it would place on your lowest volume users. And you have so many low volume residential customers that imposing that on them would be a huge shift. And so the alternatives we're looking at are more based around the account charge concept, which is similar, but it tends to be lower than if you were to include all the kind of capacity or debt service components in the charge. I don't know if that makes sense, or maybe that's too much information.
No, that actually, it raises more questions, and you may get to this later, because what I'm hearing is that your low volume customers are only paying a fraction of fixed cost, which means that the real fixed costs are being spread over a smaller number of users. And we do have a lot of low volume users, but those fixed costs are fixed costs, whether you're using low volume or not. So maybe you'll address this later on, but I'm not following the equity there, so I'll wait and see what you.
Right.
It just raises more questions.
Yes, and I think you're correct. We'll kind of talk through that a little bit. It is a concern because it's typical for most utilities to charge some kind of a fixed cost regardless of how much you're using. That's very much, industry standard. And right now, the way the town has it set up, you are in a way sort of contributing to that by paying the minimum. You're required to at least pay for the equivalent of 2,000 gallons. And so if you're only using 1,000, you're paying a little extra, and that kind of accounts for that fixed cost to run the system and have, you know, customer service and so on. But I'll get in a little bit more into that and see if that kind of helps explain it a little bit more. And if you're like me, I'm very visual, so we have a couple slides here that are a little more visual.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And so, and this slide has a lot on it, but I'll kind of step through one by one here. So, a little bit of history on the minimum charge. The town has gone through a multi-year process of gradually lowering the minimum allowance. That would be the amount of volume you get with payment of your minimum charge. And just another note here that it used to be 2,500, it's now 2,000 gallons. So that change, you kind of see at the very top of that blue chart or that blue table, how that top number has gradually declined from 2021 through 2026. And this has had a couple interesting effects. So because the minimum charge is proportional to that allowance, it's basically you take the volumetric charge, multiply it by the allowance, and you get your minimum charge. There's been a couple of interesting effects. First of all, on the revenue side, if you look at those kind of red numbers in the middle of the table, that 54% in 2021 that goes down to 44% by 2026. That represents the amount of revenue that's been collected solely from charging people this minimum charge. And the total, of course, if you add those two red numbers, it's 100%. What's been happening is because that allowance has gone down, the minimum charge is bringing in a little bit less revenue relative to the volumetric charge. So essentially, we've been raising rates, but because the allowance at the very top of the table has declined, the effect has been that the minimum charge is not bringing in quite as much revenue as it used to. And you can kind of see that also at the very bottom of this table in the yellow highlighted cells. That is the percent change in a typical bill for both a 2,000 gallon water customer and a 4,000 gallon water customer. And there you kind of see that despite the 4.5% and 6% and 7.5% rate increases that were happening, that 2,000 gallon customer, that bill is relatively stable. In fact, it actually declines in 22 and 23. And it's not until 26, this past July, that because we stopped lowering the volume in the minimum, that really reflected in your lower users bill. So actually this trend kind of indirectly benefited some of those really low usage customers. But it is a challenge because, you know, ideally you want to be able to collect enough stable revenue regardless of usage. And so as we're seeing this trend of less revenue collection from the minimum, this is a great opportunity to pause and say, do we want to reevaluate the rate structure now that we have kind of adjusted the minimum a little bit over time? And this is kind of a good inflection point to take a closer look at some alternative rate design ideas. So that's kind of some history there. And then here's another way to look at it. This is kind of unique to the town. So you have a fairly large group of really low volume customers. In fact, if you look at the table over to the left, you'll see these are residential number of customer bills by levels of consumption. So the level of consumption is on the far left of the table, and the percent of bills is on the far right. And you'll see there's actually about 37% of your bills are for customers using less than 2,000 gallons. So this is really telling us that you have a lot of very either conservation minded people in your service area, which is great. We love water conservation, but it can pose a kind of a financial challenge on the utilities because as people use less water, that is the product that is being sold. And so that can have an impact on revenue stability over time. You also just have a smaller and more residential customer base. You have about 92% of your bills are for residential folks. So what that means is that maybe unlike some places where you would have a really large commercial customer base or maybe a couple industrial users that are just using so much water every month and it's just a huge source of revenue. Since you all don't have those customers, it's really just fewer units of consumption to spread out the cost. Because that's your product, you're selling it to a small group of low usage water folks. So that is kind of a challenge when we're thinking about rate design.
Question,
Mhm.
what's the time period for this? Because I see 76,000 and that's clearly multiple months. So
Right.
what's the time period we're looking at?
Yes, so this is for the full year, fiscal year 25, which would have been
Last
July of
fiscal
24 through June of 25. Yep, so that's kind of looking at the full year snapshot, just to kind of gauge, typical usage patterns among your service area. Right? Any other questions so far? All right. Sorry, I know this is a lot of information, so please feel free to jump in with questions. Just wanted to provide a little context here visually too with how the town's bills compare to others in the region. So this is a kind of typical residential bill chart at 4,000 gallons of usage. This is actually even a little bit above the median usage for the town. You have a very conservation-minded group that you're selling water to, but this just kind of shows an interesting trend. You can see the town's bills for both water and sewer are really the bright colored blue and green that are highlighted. Everything else that's kind of grayed out is other utilities in the area. And I think this chart is interesting because it compares the typical bill with the number of customer accounts. And if you see that kind of orange line overlaid over the bars of the chart, that represents the number of connections, that number of customers. And that huge spike over there to the left is Raleigh. There are over 200,000 accounts. And I think this is just an interesting chart because a lot of those higher number of accounts, utilities are over more to the left. They're a little bit lower bills. And I think it kind of hints at the story of economies of scale that can really hit a lot of smaller communities a little bit harder. Because if you are smaller, you have fewer customers to spread your costs across. And yet you still need to provide safe and reliable service 24/7. And so that kind of shows this trend a little bit and, other smaller utilities that are below the 50,000 customer mark are also a little bit on the higher side with bills for a typical customer. Now, if you do look at a 2,000 gallon customer, the town is a little bit more towards the center of this chart, which I think is interesting because, if we kind of go back just for a second to this table, we had that history of actually the lower volume users were not going up quite as much because of that change to the minimum. And so that could be part of the story of what's happening here, where you kind of had maybe some other utilities raising their rates and for the town, maybe not as much of an impact on those 2,000 gallon customers relative to others in the area.
Vanessa, I just jump in and just pointing out, of course, we hear how high, rates are here a lot of time. I'm looking at the difference between Hillsborough minimum at $59 and Owasso at 78. So that's a pretty significant difference, which just as we continue to pay attention to things you've been pointing out, it makes a difference on the volume use. So.
And who is I know it's a water authority, but who is the 9151?
Yes.
So the South Granville.
Yes, South Granville, yes.
South Granville Water.
Moore and Butner.
I wouldn't want to live there.
Right, and it is, I'll note that these are hard because there's no perfect apples to apples comparison when we do these. Every utility is slightly different. We don't know if in a few months from now, one of these utilities is going to pass a 10% rate adjustment because they've been putting off capital improvements, so it's hard when we take a snapshot in time like this. It's always kind of hard to perfectly compare. But it does give us just kind of a general sense of, it is a challenge with economies of scale with a largely residential service area to have the most affordable bills in your region. Because, it's just harder to do, so.
Just out of curiosity, because it looks like just using this and, Roxborough, Graham, I know Nevin's larger. What are they doing differently from us that they are, it looks like roughly the same number of counts, but they're lower? Am I reading that right?
Right, yes, they are a little bit lower. That's again, it's kind of tricky to know exactly, apples to apples. Sometimes another utility may be postponing capital improvements. They may be, just kind of a leaner system in some ways. Without really going in and doing a full audit of their system, it's hard for us to really comment on exactly why.
Understood.
But it's sort of, and that's why we tend to include a bunch of different utilities, just to sort of get the gist. But it's a good question.
And Mebane and Graham, correct me if I'm wrong, also share facilities or something, so they have more customers to spread costs around to.
And just a reminder to go back, we need a budget messages on the website, the reasons that the challenges that we have, there's so many things that converge. Small places don't build reservoirs and expand reservoirs.
That's right.
We've done that. The Falls Lake rules, these other places don't have to deal with
Yeah.
that. They don't have 25 pump stations for the smallest thing up there. Our pump stations per capita are off the chart, and it goes on from there.
Yep, no, thank you for reminding me, because I was just like going, wait a minute, so, yeah, connecting dots, we have things that they don't have to deal with.
Right, that's absolutely true. It's, definitely hard to have a perfect comparison for sure. And I guess with all that considered, these are all things we folded into our thoughts when we're thinking about alternative rate design ideas. And so, and I think, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the purpose of this rates structure discussion is not so much we need to pick one of these tonight, but it's more informational to kind of gauge feedback, thoughts, questions, and just share what we're thinking on these alternative designs. So, and as mentioned, we did review a meter-based structure, but it was really punitive for the vast majority of your residential customers. So we haven't done an in-depth look at that. We did a calculation for it. It was really less affordable, and, affordability is a concern. So we want to make sure, we focused on that. And so we came up with 3 alternative designs, that are kind of briefly listed here, and I'll go a little more in depth on each of these, but of course, we have your current structure. This would be the status quo. You could, in July, just escalate that by 7.5%. It would be a really simple change, and it would still bring in the revenue you would need to operate everything efficiently. So that would be our baseline. And then approach 1, we looked at an option where we would keep your minimum allowance, but then we would tack on a separate account charge, kind of like as discussed on a previous slide. It would just be a flat fee regardless of usage, and it would be completely decoupled from your volumetric rates. So that would be approach number 1, just tacking on an account charge
And that would be from everybody.
for
Minimum
everyone.
user, if somebody using.
Exactly.
5,000 gallons.
It would be, here's the extra $10 for everyone to kind of help recover some of those fixed expenses that we know don't change regardless of how much you're using.
It's the same amount regardless
Right,
of.
same amount
using 1,000,
regardless.
using 5,000.
Right, and you would still be charged for your volume. You would still, if you're using 5,000, you're still gonna have a higher bill, but it would just be flat for everyone for that fee. Yes, and then similarly, 2A and 2B, these ones also have that same account charge, but the difference is they get rid of the minimum allowance. So rather than having a minimum kind of volume you would have to purchase, they would really just have that account charge, and then you're billed for exactly how much volume you use. And the difference between 2A and 2B, 2A is just a simple volumetric charge for every unit of consumption. And then 2B is for the residential customers, they have a 2-tiered volumetric rate structure. So they would have a tier 1 that is up to 2,000 gallons, and it's a lower rate for that first 2,000. And then every increment of usage they have beyond 2,000 gallons is going to be at a higher rate. So, and I'll show this visually because I know it's hard to kind of picture, but here's approach number one. I circled that account charge. It's 1014. It would be a flat 1014 for every single water account. And then you keep your minimum charge for the first 2,000 gallons. But you'll notice rather than being the 2664 that it is currently with our 7.5%, that would go down to 2216. So your minimum charge would be a little bit lower than it otherwise would be without that flat account charge tacked on to it, to the bill. And then likewise, your volumetric per kgal per 1,000 gallons, that charge would also get to decline relative to what it otherwise would be. So instead of 1332 per 1,000 gallons, you'd be looking at 1108 per 1,000 gallons. So you're essentially recovering the same amount of cost, but just spreading it out a little bit differently. And the advantage here is that it's really allows you to capture those fixed customer service and billing expenses very clearly and regardless of usage, and you can kind of adjust that account charge independently of the volume charge. That's approach number one. And then 2A, that same account charge 1014 is still in play here, but you get rid of the minimum first 2,000 gallons requirement. And the volume charge is a little bit higher than it would be under approach one, but it still would be lower than it otherwise would be if you kept your same rate structure. So that's 2A. And then similarly, 2B is going to look really similar to this, but it has the tiered volume charges. So for residential, they would get a first tier up to 2,000 gallons at a lower rate at only $10.10 per thousand. And then everything else above that would be the 1314 per thousand. Currently, you don't have any tiered rates, so that's why you see that 1332 listed twice, because every increment of usage is billed at the same volumetric rate right now. That would be an option to kind of give a break to residential customers that are using a very small amount of water and want to economize. It tends to also promote conservation of water. So that's 2B, and I thought what would be most kind of helpful in terms of understanding relative impacts is just to kind of show various levels of consumption and how those bills would change under these three different alternatives. So this slide has a lot of information on it, but kind of moving from left to right. So leftmost column, you have the levels of usage in gallons. So we're showing customer usage of 1,000 gallons up to 8,000 gallons. And then moving over to the right, that's our existing rate structure. It is with the 7.5% rate adjustment because we're kind of taking a snapshot of 2027, what that next fiscal year would look like. So that's your existing structure. And then you see approaches 1, 2A, and 2B. And then finally, those last two columns, those are going to represent the cumulative bills and usage in your customer base. And basically what that tells us is about 38% of your customers are using at or under 2,000 gallons. And if you go all the way down to the bottom of that chart at the 95 percentile, that tells us that only 5% of your customers are above 8,000. So a lot, you can kind of see like roughly half are around the 3,000 gallon mark. There just aren't as many large volume customers out here. And what I did here, I know a lot of numbers here, but I did highlight in green the bills that would be lower with the alternative rates as compared to the first column. So you can see alternative number one, the green highlighted items are really over the 5,000 gallon mark. You're kind of benefiting the customers that are using larger volumes with that scenario. Their bills kind of go down versus what they otherwise would be. Now it's not, you know, if I kind of zoom in on that one, it's really not by a whole lot. We're talking a matter of, you know, $1 for a $5,000 customer, but it is still something that would, you know, make a difference. And this is part of the challenge with rate design is there were always gonna be winners and losers, and it's kind of both an art and a science. So, it's not quite as clear cut as maybe saying, here's how much you need to, bring in revenue. This is a little bit more of an art and a science, but you can see that, that percent change represents how this alternative would benefit those larger usage customers in green. So that's our first one. Coming back to the big picture here, 2A, that benefits your low volume users. In fact, both of the 2A and 2B scenarios really help out your lowest volume consumers. And then incidentally, the 2A, we also saw a slight, very slight decrease in the bill for the $8,000 gallon customer. But again, not by much. So it's really more about those 2A, 2B kind of have an impact for those lower volumes. And here's a little more detail. So that would be 17% lower versus your existing rate structure for someone using only about 1,000 gallons. And I think one thing I just wanted to point out here is that, it may seem like a big change, some of these numbers going up, some going down. And, with some of these alternatives, it's really about saying, well, ideally, we kind of want some of these bills to go up a bit so they can recover more of those fixed costs and pay their fair share towards the customer service and the billing. So a bill adjustment isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is something we want to think about. So I just wanted to point that out that, a 2,000 gallon customer going from 2664 to the 3412, that's, it is an increase, although it's also recognizing that that's a lot of customers. They should be paying for fixed costs that we need to recover, that we know we need to be able to pay for. So that's kind of 2A, and then 2B similar. This one has a little bit more of a gentle, I guess a gentler impact on that 2,000 gallon customer. So this one is with the 2-tiered volume rates for residential. And because of that first tier being a lower rate, if you're only using 2,000, you stay on tier 1. You're just paying that lower volume rate. So it kind of is a gentler impact going from 2664 to the 3035. Yeah, so again, I know that's a lot of information to kind of digest. And I'll go back maybe to this kind of summary slide for a minute. Are there any initial thoughts or questions on this so far?
I had one initial, which is how come the commercial are paying less than tier 2 on that alternative of residential? Why are we giving the corporate a break over the residents?
So would this be the approach to be where we're looking at a tiered rate?
Right.
Right. So it's typical for only residential to have a tiered volumetric rate. And the reason is that sometimes commercial customers, their usage volumes are harder to predict. They can sometimes be, I guess I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it, and Melissa, feel free to jump in if I'm butchering this, but it may be less predictable. Like with residential, that it's a household and they may be trying to conserve water and just using it for indoor water use, for instance, no irrigation. And so it's reasonable to say, okay, a lot of our residents might be only using 2,000 gallons if they're really trying to be frugal. And so you kind of give them a little bit of a break with that first tier. It's actually kind of helping the residents more than the commercial, whereas non-residential, and I think the reason, it stands out is the 1198 is lower than the 1314. And the idea is that it's kind of a weighted average of both tiers in a way. Residential tier 2, that's a little bit more discretionary usage that you could maybe have a little more control over. So it is billed at a higher rate. All commercial usage, including the first 2,000, is billed at 1198. So that's a little bit, even if you're using less, you don't have quite as much control over your bill if you're commercial. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. But that is a fairly industry standard approach for pricing to give residential a tiered structure and to have non-residential pick up more of an average flat volume charge.
But we're also talking at 8,000 gallons, less like 2% of the bills that have.
Right.
That typically are issued in a year, so it's a
Right.
really small population. as
It
well.
is.
It's at 8,000, I'm just looking at over 2,000. It looks like, if I understood the numbers right, the 2,000 to 3,000 gallon households, and I'm thinking that's where you're gonna have kids. And doing laundry, they're gonna, families are squeezed enough, they're gonna get the biggest hit. Whereas your super users of 8,000, 7,000, 6,000, proportionately, they get less of a hit. That,
It's like 5% total
yeah,
of all of our users.
and yeah, it's a smaller, but it's a greater number of our family users get more of a hit. My just initial is, it doesn't sit so well. The higher users, that 5, 6, 7, 8,000 gallon. And I don't know, does that mean it's larger families or, swimming pools, or they're washing the boat, I don't know what's different. No, I mean, that's but that goes back to that commercial. Schools would be commercial, where they're paying less. I'm talking about just the residential. It looks like, if I'm reading right, it's that 2,000 and 3,000 gallon that take the biggest hit, and that's. I'm my comfort level is not great. In initial.
Are you talking about scenario 2B's?
Right, well, it looked like more or less across the board, and I'm having, just looking at this. Keeping things straight.
Right, and I think, it sounds like, if I go back to even looking at the number of bills, this is just for residential. And, it is, a largely smaller usage customer base. There aren't a whole lot of residential customers using, 8,000 gallons.
Right.
It's really more kind of 2,000-3,000-ish, where you get, 50-60% of your users, below that. So, and the idea with 2B is sort of saying that, okay, the first 2,000 gallons of that, of your 3,000 or 4,000 is gonna be at a lower 10-10 rate rather than up at, $13.
So I think I understand what you're asking, which is when you ran the approach for approach 2B. I feel like I just now caught up to you perhaps, so let me know if this is right. Why not keep the approach for the non-residential at 1332?
Right.
Why reduce it further for a non-residential?
Yes.
Is that an option? Is that something to consider?
Right, and there is, when we did this calculation, one thing we can play around with is, the length of tier 1, so it could go beyond 2,000. It could go to 3,000, for instance. That's one kind of toggle we can look at. And then another thing would be the, ratio of tier 1 to tier 2. And that kind of also sort of helps us determine the non-residential, which is kind of like a total average rate. So those are things we can think about, and especially with affordability for families being a concern. These are things we can maybe take some more thought around and try to see if there's a way to, think about these users who are back here kind of, and I think you were saying the 3,000 to 4,000 gallon range.
It looked like when I was unless I misunderstood, it looked like that 2,000 to 3,000. That group was just bearing the greatest
Mhm.
increases.
Right,
Um,
sorry, there we go.
I mean, I'm totally supportive. We need to have our fixed costs. Whether it's we need to make sure our fixed cost infrastructure. And I look at customer service and billing, that's infrastructure.
Mhm.
It's a labor. It's a
Right.
labor fixed cost, a little bit different from. Pipe and they, but still there's an infrastructure which. I mean, we need to capture every user, in my opinion. And it's a right to serve, you may choose not to turn it on, but it's there for you to turn it on, it's gonna be potable and clean and all of that. But, I'm really struggling with the hit of some of the families and, the higher usage. To me, that would be where we would see. Um, a higher rate or whatever, it's a higher usage. It's. Is there a way to see, I know you had the comparisons, is there a way to see? If in one spreadsheet? I mean, I think this is it, the best we're gonna see is the difference.
Right, so this will kind of compare. all
Yeah,
three.
and that's what I'm saying is it looks like. Where it's green, it's lower when you're higher usage as opposed to that 2 to 3,
Right.
4 where that's your families.
Kathleen, if I can interrupt and say, Sarah has provided this presentation to the board. And
Oh,
so
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I needed to look ahead and back and I'm trying to, take it all in and, it's like. I can do it. Huh?
Right,
But I would say I would expect that to potentially be the case. I mean, the 3,000 to 4,000 gallon users are also a good chunk. I have to go back to the slide that says like what the percentages
Mhm.
are still a good chunk. And so,
great.
ideally, I'd like to see it exponential in terms of, and less like a bell curve, but I do want a break for the lower folks. And my biggest concern when we suggested all of this was transparency in the billing.
Mhm, mhm.
Because so many folks, and I hear from a lot of folks, if I had access to the billing system, I could probably confirm in real time and do some fact checking. But a lot of people feel as though they pay for water they don't use.
Right,
In reality, they're purchasing 2,000 and they can use it or not.
right,
But to a lot of people, they feel as though they're paying for water they don't use. They don't understand that some of those fixed costs are built in and that sort of thing. And so, ideally, I wouldn't want perfect to be the enemy of the good because I think
Right.
at least we embarked upon this exercise and trying to handle the transparency piece while also being financially responsible, fiscally responsible for the enterprise fund. I think that if y'all did toggle, to use your very technical term,
Right.
some of the things, I think it would be interesting for the volumetric cost to look at maybe extending that runway for the tier
Mhm,
to the 3,000 to 4,000.
mhm.
Because it will be based on usage, while having that, that fee attached to it. I don't know if the numbers would change all that remarkably much. I mean, even between, well, currently it's 2,000, is 10.2 or 10.10 and then 13.14. So maybe that, I mean, $3 may or may not be marginal. But I could also see making sure that in changing it, it doesn't impact the bottom line as
Mhm.
well. And that's difficult balancing act. So in my mind, if that goes up to 3,000 and 4,000, and then that necessitates having a higher administrative fee, I think you're just squeezing the jello from one end to the other. I don't know if you're actually changing it all that much.
Right, and I think that's a good point about kind of squeezing from one end to the other. One of the things that's interesting about the current structure is that it's very much based on how much people are using. If for some reason in a future scenario, not that this would happen, but if you suddenly had people go from a bunch of people using 3,000 to 4,000 gallons, which you currently have quite a few, all the way to everyone conserving and only using 2,000 gallons every month, that would be a kind of a problem because it's so dependent on people using the water and billing those volume rates to every increment of usage. And this is why it's very popular to have these account charges, because that's a guaranteed revenue source, but it's not arbitrary. Rather, it's based on actual costs of providing billing and customer service. And so that's a way to explain it to customers, is that by paying your account charge every month, you're really paying for those essential services that allow you to be billed every month and kind of have those administrative costs covered. So that's a way to think about it. And
What would it look like if we had, because it's a little bit with it, when it's just customer service billing. It's a little misleading because it's like telling people that there is no fixed cost infrastructure. And that's not true. What would it look like if there were the billing, customer service, and an infrastructure cost and then you have your tiers.
right.
Can I help step in?
Yeah,
a little bit?
Yes, yeah, that's a good question, but.
And I don't know, I'm trying to kind of think about different points that you've asked, and I know anytime when you're moving from a minimum charge, the minimum gets very convoluted, but just to go back. Here it is. Oh, I can't open this,
Because that's,
I can't see it.
right now, in having conversations with people, we try to talk to them, or at least I do. It's like there is a fixed cost of infrastructure. That's hard pipe,
Yes,
separate from billing and customer service.
right. And if you think about that and you look at your current rate structure, if you're using 2,000 gallons, 3,000 gallons, 4,000 gallons, the way that rate structure is set up, there is no fixed cost recovery.
Exactly.
The only people that are really paying a fixed cost is the people that are using below 2,000 gallons. So you're not really recovering kind of fixed costs from everybody else that's using over the 2,000 gallons. They're just paying for their volumetric usage. And that's part of kind of what you're seeing here.
Right, I get that, but what's missing for me is I see we've got the volumetric. What's missing for me is the fixed costs. We're defining fixed cost as only customer service and billing, which to me is misleading to customers. There's nothing for fixed costs. And what would it look like if we had fixed customer, so customer service billing and fixed costs? Because that way, we're in terms of transparency for customers, they're seeing what the actual fixed costs for plant and pipe look like if just to have access to water.
Right.
And Kathleen, if you look further down on the slides, maybe we're gonna get to this. Or maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, there's even the cost of debt
Right.
for water and cost of debt for sewer.
Yeah, go
I think
ahead.
I would love to see,
Yeah.
there's so many other things, and
And this,
in town versus out of town.
and this
There are a
was-
lot of variables to provide that transparency. I get what you're saying, and
Yeah, it's, we're getting there. It's like I said,
the problem is the majority of your costs are fixed. If you kind of think about running a water and sewer utility, I mean, the only things really that are not fixed are electricity, chemicals,
Exactly.
some of those kind
Yeah.
of things. So that's the reason we put an account charge in there. That's just the cost of customer billing, meter reading. That's it. That's all it covers. If you start layering on all of those other costs like water debt, you're laying on another $15 and that just takes you up to $25, $26, for fixed cost.
Understood, but what would that, what I'm asking is what I don't know is what would that actually look like if, because that's honest billing of this is what water actually costs. What would that look like? I still don't have a good picture of what does that actually cost?
Can I make a suggestion? Because I think we can go back and forth on
Yes,
this for quite some time. Maybe we can ask, either Raptels or, our staff to bring back other options that might be useful for the transparency report in the bill.
That would be
And
great.
especially for the, if you remember the graph where the low volume utilities have the higher costs, they're all grouped together, right? They're either a large number of customers, a small number, and they kind of fall neatly in those categories. It'd be interesting to see what those small utilities like us provide in terms of transparency versus, I don't think we need to see what large municipalities.
no, but I would love to be able to answer to a resident, what is
I would
the
like to
actual
explore that.
cost?
That more, so maybe we can
Yeah.
ask staff to come back with other options for them, because you're right, transparency is critical and a certain, the top 10 question we get as elected officials. How are you being good stewards of our resources and tax dollars and usage fees? So that would be nice to know. What other questions do we have? There's a lot of really good information, by the way. Thank you. It's well documented, well presented. Thank you.
I had a question. Can you flip to that screen that has like the residential rate and then the non-residential one?
Yes.
The chart, 'cause
This one here,
yeah.
yes.
So when we say non-residential, it's anybody outside the town of Hillsborough limits, is it? No.
So that would just be commercial,
So that's just,
schools, hospitals, that kind of customer.
okay.
But this is all assuming within town
Institution.
limits. Right, institutional.
All of the
All the rates shown on these slides are actually in town.
Okay.
Out of town customers pay a 1.95 times greater
And it would
charge.
still be that,
would-
everything
the
would still be that
proportions
2
would
times
be-
basically. Okay.
Right,
That's where I was.
And the volumetric rate that you're recovering from each of those classes is actually $11.98. You're recovering $11.98 on average from the residential class. It's just that you're offering the first 2,000 gallons at a lower rate versus anything over 2,000 gallons, just to give a little bit of a benefit to those low volume users. And to kind of to add to what Vanessa had talked about, the tiered rates, you only put a tiered structure on residential customers because they can control discretionary water use. Commercial customers typically cannot control, they don't, you typically have separate irrigation meters, so they don't have a lot of discretionary use for non-residential customers. So you charge them for everything that they use at the $11.98 versus residential. We're trying to give a little bit of a, hey, if you're residential and you can control that and you can keep it low, we're gonna give you a little bit of a price break and push come the recovery of the cost to the residential class. That's really kind of has that discretionary use.
I don't know, I just have a funny image in my head, suddenly thinking about schools obviously being an institutional user and having to control Timmy to flush the toilet less often or something. You're right, you don't
They put it on the toilet.
you're not really able to control a lot of things.
Eric,
Having sat in years of water and sewer advisory committee meetings where this was discussed in years of town board, it's a tough and complex situation. And so the concept of charging, the base rate for however you calculate that, the volumetric conceptually made a lot of sense. But as Vanessa mentioned, it's a punitively high number. So we're in this conundrum that, the folks that like the email that I responded to a couple weeks ago. The number one complaint, I think Marie says she hears and the board says like, I'm being treated unfairly. And I said to the customer, we're looking at this, but one of the possibilities is to do what you want, your rate could go up dramatically, and that's where we're at. So that leads me to the next point for the board to really consider, because we can do what ifs, and we've done them for probably 20 years, and we're still at the same place, is what is the one most important thing the board wants to change potentially or would make a difference? You don't have to answer that tonight. And then when you get to that number one thing, because I think if we start trying to do two or three things, it's gonna make it more complicated. Because any change that is made, the losers who have to pay more money, we will hear from them in every single possible way. So that leaves me like, is it worth the change? And will it make a difference? I'm oversimplifying and going, oh, it's gonna make $1 one way or another on somebody's bill, then it's probably not worth kicking the hornet's nest. But if it addresses the equity issue that comes up and there's some sort of base charge, and Vanessa used the account is here is an option. If that addresses the number one question that people feels like over time, we'll hear a lot, there'll be a flurry. We'll work hard educationally if that's what we do, we'll get bumps, but ultimately if the board feels that that puts us in a better place, because that takes away that fairness issue, and we still end up with, you know, a fiscally responsible model, and that's good. I'm sorry, that was like a whole lot in a couple minutes to cogitate on.
Or to be.
Oh, Matt, sorry.
I didn't know if we were gonna share around the horseshoe, but I like to answer Eric's rhetorical question. I think that the two biggest things are people who feel like they're being charged for water they don't use. And to do away with the minimum charge deals with that. If Sally only used 750 gallons, she's gonna be charged for 750 gallons, but she has an account charge on top of it. I think it makes the most sense. Just do away with the minimum charge and really tackle that insecurity that folks have. Because when people don't use the minimum charge and then we raise the rates, the thing is like, but I'm already not using my, you know, I'm already not using 2,000 gallons, and now I'm being charged more for not using 2,000 gallons. And I think it's the right approach to do 2B.
So what was the last thing?
It would be the right approach to do 2B.
Other thoughts, observations? Don't have to make any decisions tonight, but
I have a question about changing to tiered rates. Has there been like? What do you usually see from the public? Like right away, is there a change of dropping off that people all of a sudden like we're conserving big time, like 50% of the customers all of a sudden all drop down to the lower tier? Or is there some kind of idea of maybe built into this saying we'll lose so many at this higher rate? I don't know if there's some data to go behind that.
Well, the majority of the residential structures in North Carolina now have become tiered rate structures as a response to the 2008, 2009 drought. A lot of the cities, I know Vanessa showed Raleigh with the 200,000 accounts, have a lot of residential discretionary use. Like they had a lot of water irrigators. So when you start putting those tiers in, you see that kind of pull down some of that discretionary water use. And so you get a little bit less in from your volumetric revenues. The way that Vanessa has got it designed, which is the 2,000 gallon tiered structure, and just the way that you all are with kind of the low volume usage already, you don't have a ton of discretionary water use. And the way that this is done is more like I'm going to call it like a lifeline rate, for lack of better terminology. It's more, hey, we're going to give you a benefit on your essential water usage. So it's not necessarily targeting that discretionary use that's in those upper tiers. So
It's like the 2,000 to 2,500 is kind of like at the top of the bell curve of there. Where
Okay, so are there any other takeaways that we need to consider for tonight? Other than, I'm not sure if we're allowed to ask the consultants to, to do any more work, so,
Only other comment I would share is I don't think the board should feel pressure if the board wants to make a rate structure change in the upcoming budget. You know, that's certainly your prerogative if you feel that's appropriate. But the slower is faster approach, especially when something that affects every, almost 6,000 customers. It could be that, the slower is faster. We just take our time, or what other forms of input do we want to get? How do we want to, get things out? It could be done a target for the following year. I just think we should be flexible and the board shouldn't feel pressured.
thank you. Then maybe we'll make a suggestion to you and staff to come back with additional options based on what you've heard us say. Right, it's a whole lot to digest, not only the information, but our comments as well, so. But your guidance is appreciated, for sure. If you have other suggestions, how we might time these future conversations or decisions, I think we're all open to do. Okay, there's nothing else, thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yes, thank you.
Should I? Okay, thank you.
So we can only change rates one time, right? Only with the budget, or we can do it like
Throughout the
every time.
year.
Yeah, you can do water and sewer any time during the year. Like when the textile mill went out of business, we had raised rates at the beginning of the year, and then it was September and we had to raise them again.
Okay. All right, thanks.
It's times, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, item C, strategic plan mid-year update with Jen.
Good evening. All right, so we have our next quarterly update, which includes quarters 1 and 2. So it's a mid-year check-in that we're doing right now. We have all of our department heads here. So if you have any questions specific to a particular department, we either can try to answer it now or get back to you if we don't have an answer tonight. I thought we could go focus area by focus area like we normally do. Does that sound good to the board? All right. Well, let's get started with sustainability. Were there any questions related to any of the initiatives under sustainability? All right. Not seeing any, so I will move on to connected community, which only has 2 initiatives. Were there any questions related to either of those 2 initiatives? Okay. We can go to economic vitality, a few more initiatives here. Were there any questions related to economic vitality focus area? Yes, Commissioner Hughes.
Train station master plan. I know the timeline was a few fiscal years, but how's that going with the uses and development scenarios? Just because it feels like the train station is supposed to be a little bit more in the near future than it used to be, and so I'm kind of, concerned, but just curious.
Matt, do you want to take that one?
The train station is not imminent, and so until we get a clear path forward on construction timeline, it's premature to develop the master plan for the area around the station.
Are we still okay with I thought we had a hard stop thought.
We do, and we're exploring extensions with NCDOT at this time. Not to bore you all with the details, but the same issues that have caused the delays for years with the railroad and their preliminary engineering continue to plague us. Until that's resolved, we don't have any kind of timeline to move forward.
I think I heard someone say in a meeting recently, it's not us, it's them. In terms of the
Commissioner Ferguson.
And I wish Eric were here. But one of the things I now can't remember what meeting I was where, but I know that, you know, we can't do a business franchise. But we can do a business license, and one of the issues that we have is we have no idea who our businesses are. But communities across North Carolina can do a nominal business license fee, and they know who their businesses are. I mean, when I say nominal, it's like $5-10. I don't know what that entails on staff capacity. But that's something that, as we look at vitality, we've been going round and round and hoping the chamber can do this and this, that, and the other, but when I've talked to other communities across the state, doing that nominal business license fee, not a franchise fee, but just a license, which is allowed of that $5-10. It's not a burden on the business, but they know who our businesses are. Can we do that without killing staff?
And so now we have the legal authority to do that? Cause I
thought
thought that
this-
went away where we used
Changed a
to.
while ago.
But you still, it's a semantics, but right now there are even now, it's a license, it's not a franchise, it's a semantics thing. You can't tax them, or it's a funky thing, but
The privilege license. tax
Privilege, that was
was
it.
abolished years ago.
you can't do a privilege, but you can do a license, which is legal.
It's called a privilege license tax, though.
I'm just saying it's being done now across the state. I know, Eric.
I want to make sure that I understand what your interest is. So I hear you are proposing to charge in whatever mechanism we can businesses,
Like-
so we know who's in town and it's a nominal fee.
Exactly, like, I mean, nominal, like, it's $5. It's not a burden.
I cannot express strongly enough that I think that's it's a well-intentioned idea, but the impact on staff, which I
That's-
appreciate you being considered, would be awful.
Okay, that's
It's-
said.
We would generate a very small amount of money, and then the nightmare factor, even when we collected privilege license and had the illegal ability to get it, it was a lot of hard
Okay.
work, so it would add hours. I'm not saying we need to add another staff person in building, but we might.
Okay, no, like I said, I wasn't sure what the impact on staff, and I wasn't advocating for, pile more on just staff.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, so I know I walked in the middle of it. If we were bigger, economies of scale, if we were Durham, it maybe would be worth it, but absolutely not for us.
Okay. Cause I keep trying to wrap my head of. Like I said, I've talked to some, other communities, they have a way of figuring out who their businesses are, and we still struggle.
Matt, looks like Matt.
I was trying to get clarity on what the data is that you think that we're lacking, because between the fire inspections data and the data that utilities uses for backflow prevention and cross connection control, we can identify the businesses that are in town. So
Even
there's
the home occupations,
home occupations,
cause when this.
if they're operating legally, they will have gone through a building permit process.
Well, they wouldn't have a building permit because if they're operating out of their house.
There's a review process for home occupations now. Depending on the scale of it. We're not gonna capture everybody operating an LLC out of their home or even with a business license. I'm just trying to understand if that's what you're.
Yeah, I'm just
looking
trying to
for.
figure out,
Okay.
But what I'm hearing is we don't have a practical way of getting better data than what we already have. So never mind.
I have one inquiry about EV 2.2. Engage the local business community through periodic small business workshops.
Yes.
Is that the same thing that we engaged the chamber to do with the Merchants Association?
I think that,
Yeah. Works together with that.
Okay, so they're doing quarterly meetings like that. And the flag is yellow, so maybe it should be green.
so that one, I know Shannon had said that there had been limited staff capacity in the fall and the winter, cause I thought she was doing some separate
small business
Yeah.
workshops.
It was marked as yellow because the first half of the year, Q1, Q2, at Post Chantal, we really didn't have capacity to support something like that. And so there hasn't been the type of large workshop that we envisioned so far this year. We're targeting that towards the Q3, Q4.
Understood. Thank you, Pete.
Orange.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, Catherine?
sorry, on EV 2.1 is the labor market. I don't know how well capital area workforce development. I know we fit in there. I don't know how active they really are in Hillsborough. But they're the workforce development. They should have, I mean, normally they would be our partners to know what our gaps are. Do you know if,
Not sure. Do you know if Shannon's worked with?
No, we'll have to look at it up.
Yeah, we'll make.
I mean, I know technically that's the workforce development that we're supposed to be working with, but I've not seen evidence necessary, And maybe they are, not, but
Any other questions in this category?
Right. Well, that was a popular one. Next, community safety. Any questions on any of these initiatives that cover police and emergency management? All right, seeing any. So we'll finish with service excellence.
I had sent a question on to Eric about service excellence, the 1.2 about the utilities asset management plan, and that came up in my mind because of these rate increases that we're looking at and kind of seeing why are we still yellow? What do we need to do to get green? Where are we in the process? Marie did share that some of that with me. I just wasn't sure for the rest of the board to have that information also. Marie can share maybe like the status of it, because if we're looking at capital improvement purposes or even under capital improvement, do we have the right background and so we say yes to these additions to the budget, so.
Good evening. Yes, status wise, I would like to say that we essentially practice this in theory. This actual task is to formalize an asset management plan, and what we mean by that for utilities is that we formalize a plan that provides a strategic, long-term way to manage our assets to keep the costs as low as possible. So the components of that are you need to know where your assets are, how old they are, what their condition is. Then you determine what is the level of service that we want to provide our customers. We used to have a lot of these examples in our past strategic plan when we had like pages of goals and we ended up whittling those down to be more succinct. But those are the types of things that will go into a level of service, like we want no regulatory violations, or we want to clean X feet of sewer a year. We want to provide all the time under normal conditions, a minimum pressure. So you determine your level of service and then you define your critical assets, and those are, then you rank them. What is the risk of failure and what is the consequence? So if something goes down near the hospital, that's a pretty high consequence of failure. So we would categorize those assets and then we would roll those into a proactive approach, which again, we already do in our minds because we want to and we have to with our financials. we would put them on a proactive maintenance plan or capital improvement plan for replacement, for more frequent evaluation and inspection. So we have many components already of this plan. We just don't have it all in one document. So we have our utility cloud, which has our assets, but with some software changes to their program, we're unable to do timely updates to our assets. We had talked about moving to a new software system that would be used by multiple departments. The first department to get into that has expressed some concerns, so we're sort of waiting to see on the data management side where we're gonna go with that. And we may need to just get it done with the help of a consultant. And we need to determine what's right size for our utility. Smaller utilities can have something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet that has your critical assets and the risk of failure and the consequence, and then you move that into maintenance programs or capital improvement programs. Or you can do something very, very fancy that's all contained within a software system that maps out, you know, visually the areas that maybe had the most main breaks over the past 10 years. And then you would focus your rehab and replacement on something like that. So I hope that answers your question about where we are in the status. We have not been able to get something comprehensive put down. But for years, we have already practiced this concept in what we do. It's just in fragmented pieces and a lot in our minds as well.
I think part of why I wanted to ask these questions is, as I said, you've got the stuff in your mind, you've got the experience and all that stuff, but when we have to make these decisions on what we're gonna approve in the budget, we don't have it in our mind, and so I guess I was looking for this. And in my mind, I'm like, Excel spreadsheet, that's fine, I'll take an Excel. Just, you know, so I was just trying to get an idea of when we're looking at the budget, when will we get something that we can look at and understand where it ranks in all this, the rest of the utilities field, and to help us decide in these tight years. I mean, when I asked the question, we were looking at 14 or 12% increase, and it's definitely, I mean, well, and how that's a little earlier conversation, but still, I just kind of wanted to get an idea behind this, since we're gonna be looking at making a new strategic plan. This looks like it might carry over into the new one
I
versus.
feel it will carry over, especially because our challenges are, we want to expand our system as well. So a lot of our current capital projects are growth related. So we're balancing what we want to expand to bring more customers, which will also help balance the rates, larger customers, more pieces of the pie, versus taking care of what we have. So, of course, recently we have not been able to get to this in any level of detail because we've had a lot going on with our grant programs, with our emergencies and things like that. So it will carry over to the next plan, but we will get it done.
As I said, I think in my case, just, I know I've asked the question, it's like, and just, you know, basic then, like, basic, this is the reason why, understanding that you've got all these other things and factors. Adding to the delay of this part of the strategic plan would be just my request here.
Okay, sounds
I don't
good. Any other questions about that?
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, we'll come to you for the next quarterly update in May then. Thanks.
Thank you.
On to item D, working together, board and staff. Eric.
All right, I'll try to I'll be pretty informal, on my half, and I'll toss it over to Catherine Wright in a bit. And this had come up, I think, just condense, prior years when new board members have gone through orientation, got everything and was able to condense it to less than one page to make it easy to go back over. And I can't remember, a couple months ago, I mentioned it in emails, like, oh, instead of, waiting for something to come up, things change. We're working in a dynamic situation. So touching base with the board on one hand to go, is what we're doing working for you? Do you have input for us on concerns, tweaks, opportunities to streamline things or whatever? And then also it's a pretty common thing for me to be at a manager's meeting and managers say, I have 3 emails that are queued up and I can hit the send button all the time. Board member goes and orders a town staff member and then yells at them because they didn't do something. The email number 1, number 2. Fortunately, we don't deal with that very often, but instead of waiting for those, it's just at least we're touching base on a regular basis or whatever. So that was the quick lead in. The board's familiar with the concepts. So how are things working with the 1 hour rule? We don't have a spreadsheet where we calculate it. We sort of ballpark those numbers. So have there been any things where I've been too bureaucratic or we've been doing too much without coming back to the board as a whole? So any feedback or thoughts on that?
Or are we asking too many questions?
Oh, you. Yeah, it depends what night it is.
Because I feel guilty.
No, that's why we're here, is to answer your questions. All right. By quick silence, I'll move on. Don't want to force anybody. Next one was, as far as directions to staff, going through the manager and acting manager. I think when everybody came on for the first time, we're just sitting down chatting in between. And it's like, hey, we're informal. There's other local governments that have in their code of ordinances, you as an elected official shall not talk or you shall not give any directives whatsoever to any staff member other than the board. We're not that rigid. The board's very good. So my ask was like, somebody needs to tell me, or if I'm Matt or Jen as acting manager, if there's any sort of discussion or issue of consequence that happened. Doesn't matter if it's the board member or the staff member. Usually somebody does. We might cross paths or whatever. It's usually not been a problem. So just touching base on how things are flowing. Are there any changes or concerns from the board that you would like us to consider? All right. Moving
Maybe
on.
happen to know that during regional day, Lee Worsley actually gave a presentation on board manager relations, do's and don'ts.
Okay, all right.
Including some of this.
Oh, that's good. He made my life easier. Oh, so this was actually funny to me. Maybe you won't think it's on the individual request, which is C1, when we get an individual board member asking for stuff, and if it's like whether we do it or don't do it, what needs to be shared with the entire board. I realized, like, in all my years of doing this, like, what's the trigger point? And it's like, I don't know how you would define it, but I think the way you would define it is if the board is not happy and you're saying like, hey, we didn't know about this, then I'm not doing my job. So I don't know if like the information you're getting what you need, or is there any tweak we need to make sure that so that nobody's being surprised on the board.
I think, we talked about this earlier, you do an incredible job of keeping us posted, and when there's a question, sharing with the rest of the board. If we haven't beforehand, you do an amazing job. The only thing that I remember that's popped up had to do with the flop cameras and that contract. Because of that was a sticky widget. That's a case where we would have liked to have seen that contract. I'm picking literally one thing out of thousands and thousands and thousands that have occurred. So in terms of percentage, I think we're hitting pretty close to. Yeah, we're pretty, I mean, that's as close as 100% is realistic.
We got making sure that, the mayor is CC'd on anything of consequence, and I wrote down a question is like, is there anything that might be an exception to the practice of, keeping the mayor in the loop on anything? I realize a lot of times, but I may get a text from a board member or a quick, I'm in a meeting right now, what are we doing on this? It's like something like that's not a big deal, but if you can think of anything, let me know.
Surprise birthday party or something.
That's a good one. All right, and then just since we've had plenty of emergencies this year, the flip and the switch that we started back when Tom Stevens was mayor, when things get ramped up enough, and it's interesting as we've been going through the countywide emergency plan updates. So we're pretty much all having very similar systems, the same framework, which I don't know if we're the only county in the state to do that, but we're probably close. One of the things, because we're smaller than all the other units, when Assistant Chief Simmons and Matt Eford and I and other staff were talking with them, they said that the way most managers aren't serving as the incident commander, but those units are a lot bigger. And I came from a background of doing that. So it may be in an ideal situation, it may be better that, that the manager not, or as we grow. So if for some reason somebody else is the incident commander and I'm freed, then then the mayor and I could tag team on that role. But is there anything emergency operations related to whether it was covered here or otherwise that we need to change the way we're communicating with you?
No, I mean, I would say the probably biggest one was Chantal most recently, and I think that definitely helped us out in probably really needing to use that system of communicating through Mark mostly and updates from staff as needed. Snow is always a boring but exciting one of testing that, just because everyone loves a snow day, but everyone wants to know when are the roads going to be cleared, and that just takes, I'm assuming it's not quite all hands, but pretty close to, a good chunk of our staff. And I think running things through the mayor and the mayor pro tem makes a lot of sense.
I found that it works really well in the past 3 times we've had to, contemplate that.
I think now all of us have had the experience of serving as mayor pro tem, so we've all had the experience of being part of that communication chain too. So
I appreciate it. It's a lifesaver when the mayor does that, when things heat up, and I know it puts a lot of work on the mayor and then the board has to switch, so I appreciate that. But anyway, everything comes up different. A question, so clearly mayoral line of succession, mayor pro tem, that's very simple. Informally, what we've done over the years, I don't know that there's maybe been one situation where mayor and mayor pro tem weren't available. And so what we had communicated, it's been a long time, was like, what I would do is the manager, unless the board tells me otherwise, is I would go to the elected official who has the most tenure on the board, and then go, down through there in the absence. But the board, you don't have to answer that now, but crazy stuff happens. So who's my point person if mayor and mayor pro tem aren't available? So
The only other thing I could think of was whoever was the mayor pro tem most recently. That because they would have more recent experience kind of contemplating those kinds of decisions.
That's actually a good suggestion.
That's all.
Although, one thing, the way we do that is because, it used. I know you referred to it before where it's the most junior person, mayor pro tem, which is usually not the way most places do that. Our way before was, it was the most senior person who has not done it. Has been it before, not the most junior, but the most senior who has not yet been pro tem. It's a nuance. In some of the situations, and I'm thinking ahead, we can, as we get, it could be very easy where you get the least experienced person. If we did mayor pro tem, thrust in a position where they're learning the job, they're learning this. Oh, by the way, here's an emergency on top of things. I don't know what the right way is, but I'm not sure that is it.
I'm not sure that's how we select the mayor pro tem. I think it's just been most recently the
Newest member.
the newest person just happens to be the next most senior
It was-
person.
Yeah, it was, but when I got on, it was, the way it was explained to me was it was the most senior person
Who had
who
that
hadn't,
third.
hadn't done it.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do.
Okay. I know you, there
It
was a
just so
phrase,
happens that Rob and Megan were both our most newest members, as was I. And so
Yeah,
that's how.
I know
it
that
worked out.
there was something that there was a phrasing there. I remember you were talking about the most junior person. It's like, well, that, it was, anyway, a shift. It was like, well, that would set people up potentially to, oh, row.
Well, in this context of Eric's question, alternative suggestion would be to the mayor pro tem, most recent to the existing mayor pro tem. So if something
So go
happened to
work
me
backwards.
and then
Yeah.
Megan, then Rob was served as mayor pro tem for last. Simply because the experience of doing that job was fresh. Yeah, that's all I got. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying that's the only thing I can think of.
All right, so yeah, let me give that some thought. I like that suggestion, and then we'll talk about how we would need to operationalize that in the emergency plan. So, and then I think the last thing was just everybody, the board already knows the line of succession after me. It's system manager Matt Everett, admin director Jen Del Valle, and then communications manager Catherine. So I think that's it for my section.
Okay, I'm gonna keep this brief as well. I have some updates on email signatures. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So we have updated the templates for the standard email signature as well as the mobile phone signature. And part of this was for accessibility reasons. So the town logo now has alternative text behind it, so screen readers can read that. And we also removed the social media icons that were there. This change also is to streamline work because with one social media link provided, we don't have to update the templates every time we have a new platform. And we don't have to ask staff and you all to update your signatures. It's one of the things on that. The link that we have now goes to the social media page on the website, and that has links to all of our platforms on social media, as well as our policies and disclaimers. So it's just a better tool. That is coming up. We haven't, some of us have the new signatures already, but I'll email them to you. So that's another change with our platform. They allow us to now create individual signatures for people. So
Can I just go silly question? How come we use the clock logo and not our seal logo?
It's easier to see the clock at the size that it's used.
Okay,
So the seal is more intricate.
gotcha.
So when would you use the seal? So
We
that-
use it for
Vision.
official documents, so our plans.
Proclamation.
Yeah, you'll see it on slides sometimes, and it has to be the minimum size, I think is an inch. All right, in addition to updating the template, we have a new template. Thank you, Matt Hughes, for the suggestion. It has a link to allow you to provide a scheduling tool. So Calendly or something like that. So let me know when I send you your email signatures if you want the meeting version. A final.
I thought you forgot. but
No,
I should have
sorry.
known better. I should have known.
I kept meaning to get back to you on it. So one final note on the signatures, if you guys could make sure you're using the town signature on all devices where you're answering town emails, because
One, it's just a good professional cohesive look across the organization. It easily gives your contact information to people who you're emailing. And it is another way to direct people to our website and to our social media.
So like all correspondence, like if I'm applying or just first.
It would be great if, yeah. If you need help, especially on getting those signatures on your mobile phones, JC is a great resource, and so is our new IT manager, Chris. They're well versed in, at least JC is well versed in getting those signatures on different phones. All right, so I'm going to share some information on some processes for sharing information, communications, social media. We really appreciate when you guys get in and share town information on social media and when you answer questions. I know you get quite a bit of questions sometimes. We would like to ask that you wait for the town news to come from the official town social media accounts first. And there are several reasons for this. One is that staff might not be prepared to answer questions yet, and you all might not have the answers as well. And so having a published news release or materials on the website allows staff and you all to have something to direct residents to so that they can have complete, accurate information. And a lot of times our news releases answer most of the questions residents have. We really try to think through what those questions might be. If you, let's see. Oh, one other thing on that. Also, sharing from the town accounts directs people again to our main communication methods. Our town news releases, our social media platforms, and our town website. If you have a request, like if you think we haven't, if you're wondering if we're going to send out a release on something and you want to kind of nudge us or let us know that you think so, just let me know. If you want to find out the timeline for sharing information or would want to get something shared a little earlier, also let me know. But please copy the mayor so that he's just also informed. In emergency events, we would love for you guys to be our eyes and ears because we can't be everywhere and it's often a really busy time. So we'd love to hear from you what questions you're receiving from the public, what you're seeing in the media, questions or misinformation, and then any thoughts you have on where we need to provide more information or some clarification. And again, this is best if you route this through the mayor because he can chunk everything into just a few emails for us so we don't have so many contacts. And it keeps him informed and the rest of you informed as well.
That was actually gonna be my question, because I can't remember what it was, but I think they emailed somebody and they were out of office. And so if we hear something on the street, we're emailing, you know.
It would be great to email it to him and he can get it to us. The communications email is the best email to contact all three of us in the division. But
does everybody get that? It goes to all three simultaneously.
yeah, so it's the communications at Hillsborough.
Okay. Yeah, I can't remember if I sent it to you or it was a while ago.
Okay.
Is it an emergency?
I can't even remember what it actually is.
Usually if I'm out of office, I have that noted, the communications email.
It might have gotten bounced to somebody, like,
Okay.
or also, I can't remember exactly what the details were, I just know that this needs to be asked. Who do I exactly send it to?
So definitely, if it's normal times, use the communications at Hillsborough email, and that goes to all three of us. If it's during an emergency event, it's best just for the mayor to compile a bunch of requests or what you're hearing.
Yeah, okay.
Media contacts and interviews. I'm sure you guys get lots of requests. It's helpful if you can let us know if you're being contacted by media or if you're planning to do an interview. I know some of you have regular interviews. It just helps us be able to respond for you if you want, provide talking points, let staff know that they might get questions. And then it helps us determine, do we need to do a news conference? Do we need to do some other form of communication that's more broad?
I thought in the past, it got directed to our mayor. And our mayor coordinated with you guys. 'Cause it
the
used to be,
media request.
yeah. Is it, so it sounds
That's-
like it's still a free for all. It's,
Yeah, we're not always hearing about all the requests, and it would be good to also hear about when staff are interviewing as well. And part of it is then we can know to check the news reports and know.
I mean, I'd like to have all. It's easier for me if all requests go to one thing because there's certain reporters that will try to just,
Mhm.
and that gets.
We've tried, we have in the past gone to the schools especially to note that.
This is not just,
Yeah.
no, this is not, I'm not talking about schools. Schools are actually organized. And I personally like being able to direct to you
us.
for mayor, there's one point so that we're not at risk of giving mixed messages
Right.
or confusing folks, and especially if we don't have all the latest and greatest
Information, yeah,
info.
yeah, and it makes sense for that to happen, and if Mayor Bell, you can just let us know as well.
That's a
And
good
you-
question.
you-
So
you
let's say, yeah, I get requests frequently directly to me, and sometimes they'll go through you, and then
Yes,
JC will email me or call me or whatever, so I hear it from a variety of different ways, but what if someone asks a board member, should the board member go start with comms?
probably start with you, yeah.
Because usually if it comes through the website, I assume that you get it if it comes through the website. Is that accurate?
Yeah, only if it's like to send it to the whole group. Sometimes they send it individually to you.
Oh, well, then there's been some folks that have been ignored. Thinking that it went to you. Oops.
Yeah, you send it to me, and if it's sent, and then I will, coordinate with comms because.
Because that was not intentional. I thought that, I thought when it came in through the board that everybody was copied regardless.
Well, you have an email that's just for you as well on the website.
Okay.
So
Oops.
just checking your your copy field or who the to field should tell you.
Yeah, well, oops.
All right, so yeah, it helps us go to check for news reports to see if we need to make any corrections. Lastly, VIP visits. So we've had a few VIPs this year. So just wanted to try to make sure we had a process for this. And so we think the cleanest process would be sending those visit requests to the mayor to help, he will help coordinate it, and then asking the VIP's communications team to contact my team. In this way, mayor stays informed, you all stay informed of the request, and then staff can determine suitability of the visit, bandwidth of staff, and then also figure out logistics. And that wraps up what I have. So are there any questions? All right.
Yeah, I'll just make an observation for everybody, and that is, sometimes the different kinds of requests come to me. Some are, something's genuinely newsworthy and there's something to say and the town is on record and things like that. Other times, maybe it's a slow news day and they're looking to get a quote. And that is not as a high priority.
Right.
So I just want everybody to, those are the two kinds of requests that I usually.
And typically, one of the reasons to know what requests you're getting and is to make sure we have the right person speaking on it. So somebody, one of our staff members might have more knowledge on it and it would be better for them to speak on.
Absolutely.
But I'm totally fine with if it's a minor thing, just going forward with that.
Okay.
Any other questions or thoughts? Sorry, it was really fast.
Oh, good.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, on to item E, nonprofit funding process review. Continue. Jen.
Easy.
For sure.
All right. Proceed.
That's a good one.
I can go ahead and get started.
Jen? Oh, sorry.
I just wait 60 seconds.
I was looking at something else.
Yeah.
Distracted.
Yeah, that's always the worst when you're focused on something, you
Yeah.
hear your name.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what if I?
Actually, it is, looking at your presentation, I think again.
In case we need a.
I guess. What do you need from us?
So,
We just get to.
it looked like just a couple of days before. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead and start then.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good. So just continuing the conversation from the first budget retreat on nonprofits. A couple took the feedback that you all provided and have some updates to get feedback on. The first thing is related to the policy. I went ahead and added some language within the policy that allows for the 501c4s. And then Catherine drafted some language that would be included on the website that just clarifies what was expressed at the last meeting, which was about non-political purposes, and added some, I don't think it's been published yet, but kind of in the vein of what was mentioned last time, adding some language to the website. And then also we would include some of that information for future application cycles, like at the budget kickoff, or the nonprofit kickoff that Josh has been leading, and then potentially including that within the application. So it'll be incorporated more so in future cycles, but for now, it would be on the website and then within the policy through the policy change. So I wanted to see if you all are okay with the policy, and if so, we can go ahead and get that adopted. Any feedback on that?
I still would like to find a way to elevate critical needs. And I think of vulnerable populations. And I think of Maslow's pyramid, if you will, especially given what's happening at federal and state level. You know, we get so many requests, and I still would like to find a way to give emphasis and priority to requests that meet the most vulnerable in some way or fashion.
Do you mind if we hold on to that one for the scoring guide?
Yeah.
Or did you want to incorporate that into the policy itself?
I would like both, because I don't want folks to be taken, because if we've got, I mean, I anticipate we will continue to get more requests than we have money. And when we have those competing needs, we give the least of these have the least of these. We are their last stop. In many cases, and I would like us to reflect that the most vulnerable be given priority, that there is a scoring, there's points, something. So that we are not, you know, we are not putting privilege over those who truly have no place else to go. The most vulnerable.
Do I recall correctly that the last time we discussed this, that we want to be able to point to strategic objectives of the town board through our
We do, but
and that when we kind of get to what you're saying, that we want to say that these projects are scored and recognized in our policy as being in line with the town's strategic objectives.
we are, but if
And
we've got, but we can have it both.
Hang on, I'm going
Okay.
somewhere with this.
Okay,
So to accomplish what you're saying, then we need to incorporate that sentiment in our strategic objectives and comprehensive sustainability plan. That way, we don't have to say, is your project in line with the comprehensive sustainability plan, town goals? Or because someone's, a group is needy or there should be a priority. We should have one statement that covers all those things.
exactly.
I thought we talked about that last time.
But I
think, or
didn't-
Did I imagine?
Well, I know that we talked about, but what I don't remember or recall, if we ever incorporated that statement in our, in the strategic, in our strategic plan, in our comprehensive sustainability plan, because right now, my understanding, at least as how I've read through things, and it may be my interpretation, is that if we get, again, competing needs for the same pot. And I'm just gonna call it here, certainly in line, but it's privilege versus vulnerable. Last stop. And our sustainability plan says both. Meaning both options can state accurately, oh, but you reflect, or we reflect our strategic plan.
Yep.
I want to give us some way that the least of these get priority over privilege.
It sounds to me, to answer your question, was that is also, I mean, either we address that in the policy or we address that in the scoring.
I would like both somehow. Because it's, in order to do a scoring, we'd have to have it somewhere or pointed to in the policy.
Scoring.
They did make those adjustments that we talked about last time,
Mhm.
increasing town objectives.
Right, and the percentages.
All right. So I think we had talked about it also kind of fit within the community impact.
Mhm.
And again, that community impact, that's equal whether it's a privilege or a vulnerable, and I mean, I foresee it's going to get more so as the years go by. I don't see more federal, more state help and more pressures on local governments to meet the needs of our most vulnerable.
So I can see that the town objectives and the community impact sections of the scoring tool addressing exactly that, but it's not as explicit.
Now, it's not
As
explicit,
you were
like I said,
describing.
I could, if I were, and I'm taking two extremes. Privileged versus vulnerable, I could go to that and argue equally. And point back to our strategic plan. And we're still left with, they're equal footing, and I'm saying, no, they shouldn't be on equal footing.
Okay, suggestions to improve the language in the scoring tool, is that
Mhm.
what is called for here? Are we
That's what I'm
gonna do
asking.
that right now, or do we come back? I know you want to get approval of the policy.
Mhm.
Commissioner Hayes, it looks like, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't plan on using the scoring tool, and I'll say why. Part of it is because anything we write down on a rubric and hand it in is public record. And I don't think that we want to add the burden on folks to keep our rubrics and that sort of thing. And if we were brutally honest in our assessment, that's up for public consumption. The other thing is, for me, this is a discussion guide. We ultimately hold the final say.
Right.
And if we were just gonna turn this over to staff to evaluate, I could totally see using a rubric, but I think we're spending too much time talking about percentages and trying to paper over issues at the federal and state level that we can't backfill all those requests even if we wanted to. And frankly, I don't think we should. I just don't.
I'm kind of agreeing with Matt, where I think, you know, if at the end of the day, we're gonna have those conversations and I think, you know, we'll be able to express and communicate what is most important, you know, to us, whether that's and not the most vulnerable important too. So, and I think, you know, us around this table will have that opportunity to really decide.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that, but I'm thinking in terms of setting expectations. I mean, the rubrics, I mean, I think of the committees that we're dealing with are of the various and sundry federal funds where there's rubrics and we discuss and there's still, here's what the numbers are, and as you get into the discussions, those numbers are reflective of a preliminary assessment, but they are not hard, fast, top score will win, because there are nuances, there are things that come out in discussion, but I do think it's a very good guide for providers of setting expectations of what are we looking for, what's that sort of thing.
I mean, I certainly get that, because with the tourism board, we did use a scoring rubric for something, and something that scored really high was a celestial opera. That was a very great idea, but it was never practical, and we weren't ever going to fund it, because the more questions we asked, the more questions we had. But that was just funny. But I mean, I think it does set some expectations, but also I think aligning to our comprehensive plan, to our strategic plan, can help weed people out a lot more. And I just don't think we're changing the world with the however many tens of thousands of dollars that we have to play. I don't want to say play with, but to play with these funds. And I think I feel like we're in jeopardy of what I often see funders do, which is build out a really complicated process for a really small dollar amount.
No, I mean, again, I'm totally aligned with that.
Yeah.
It's the intent is not to put them through bureaucratic hell.
Yeah. I've given away a lot more money with a lot less process and procedure and policy and rubric. And I just don't want us to get too deep in the weeds that, you know, because all of this is subjective too. How much of it, how we all interpret it too, is completely subjective. What one person thinks is fiscal, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Fiscal sustainability, someone could say that's 100% fiscally sustainable, and someone else thinks it's a boondoggle. I mean, it really is just really subjective, even if we try to put numbers to things.
No, again, don't disagree, but like I said, it's something that I feel pretty strongly that in general, it's our most vulnerable, and I want to send that signal to the, we're not going to be able to meet. There's no way.
Okay. Well, in the second bullet point of the proposed policy. The phrase should be in alignment with the town's strategic interests. And if you want to have an easy way to get to what you're talking about that isn't overly complicated and burdensome and subjective, then our policy statement should just be very clear and maybe at the top. It may say it in other ways. I'm just scanning through it right now. But then that's the opportunity, is to say highly aligned with the town's strategic objectives and support for the Hillsborough community or something like that. So if you want to have an additional statement that gets to that point, then I think that's the place to do it,
I,
and be high level about it.
and they know, and that's what I would like to see.
We leave that to you, to staff to wordsmith.
Yes.
Do you need to come back down?
Someone could make a motion to approve it with additional changes.
I am,
Staff.
yes, I'm willing to approve with the additional changes.
So, or second.
Awesome.
Any more discussion on the policy?
No.
All in favor of the suggested changes? Any opposed?
Thank you. So the second attachment that we had put together was a mid-year report following feedback from the first retreat to have something in between before the annual report to be able to help guide decisions for the upcoming fiscal year. So the proposed report is included as an attachment, and just wanted to get your feedback if that meets your interests. And then I included a sample like time frame on how the different deadlines would work and how it would impact the decision making.
I think the part that I question is if you're getting the mid-year reports back in January, but we don't get them until spring. Like, just working on. I don't,
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely could include them earlier, just wanted to like bundle it
yeah.
so that it's all together, but I mean, we could get it as soon as we receive them.
I mean, I guess also if staff is getting them too, the like notice any red flags at that mid-year point too. I guess that's what I'm thinking. So maybe we don't have to find the red flags, but staff is looking at them at that point to do that.
Yeah, we could review them, see if there's anything missing, coordinate with the agency if so, and then provide that to you all in kind of package.
Yeah, I guess I'm just mostly interested that they're being compliant, that they're turning in the report, that it's a checkbox on a review packet if they're reapplying, that sort of thing. I don't think we need to get them as. Maybe if you just want to put it in the agenda packet as an informational item, as a departmental report or something, but I don't think we need a.
Like a formal review.
We don't need to review it. Y'all review it.
Yeah.
Very smart, capable.
Yeah.
Very, very smart people.
Sounds good. Were the questions themselves fine?
Yeah, they made sense to me.
Sounds good. So the last thing was just a scoring guide. So do you feel like something like that would be helpful? Would it be helpful to have it put together differently where there's not like necessarily percentages, but more of like considerations that you all take into account? How do you want to approach that?
I like the general weight, the revised weighting, general. And again, I think it's also framing. It's that it's an evaluation tool and. You know, the board, it's part of the discussion of the board of how we interpret it. I don't, it's one of those, it sets expectations and. That score is part of the deliberative process, not the deliberative process.
Yeah, we could certainly work on that framing because that was our intent by trying to call it a scoring guide so that but there could also be some narrative attached to it that it's just to help frame the.
And with the
discussion.
adjustments, I think it reflects better our priorities.
What are other thoughts on that?
I like it. I think it's just a good general sort of guide to evaluate.
Changes look good to me.
You nodding your head. All right. Like we talked about last time, it's all a test. So if
Use it.
see how it goes,
Yeah.
try it out. And if we need to make changes or change course, we can always do that.
all I've got.
Great. Any questions for Jen? Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, on to item 6, committee updates and reports. Kathleen, would you like to start?
Okay, well, town and state dinner. And I'm gonna have another conversation with the league because they ignored the cog structure and now have us with Piedmont Triad and not with Central Pines region. So it's in, ours is in Greensboro, not with Raleigh, which is a little weird. Interesting. Partnership, we're getting really close on the new framework. So, we're seeking people that are on the leadership team are reapplying, plus we're putting out things again. We're reconstituting aligned with the HUD requirements. We were way out for the COC. For Central Pines Regional Day, as I shared, Lee did a great presentation on board, town manager, relationships, recruitment, hiring, retention. Eric, I think you would have been very happy on how best practices. A incredible presentation I'm going to be sharing with our planning staff on data centers. And we have copies of the slides, chock full of data and the white paper. And this was presented by Vice Chair Supervisors for Loudoun County, Virginia, which is the most dense place for data center anywhere on the planet. The one piece of information that does not exist anywhere that we can find, and we discussed this at NARC, is decommissioning. There is not a single example we can find of how do you go about decommissioning. That's going to be important if the trend that was discussed, if these data centers go into micronuclear power sources, how do you decommission when you've got that going on? But anyhow, I will get that information.
I've shared the slides with the planning department.
So you've already got it?
Central Pines staff posted them today.
So you've got all of that. Well, never mind. So you got the white paper?
Don't have the white paper though.
Okay, if you want, I can send you that.
Yes, please.
It is like, for data nerds, you're gonna love it. Extraordinary, fascinating, presentation. Also just on the growth of the triangle, we've seen a lot of that. It's reinforcing of where we've been, where we're going. And that demand on housing, the demand on dealing with traffic, the demand on, our economic centers, those slides are gonna be available. Again, Eric and staff, you guys have already seen that stuff, like, I'm sure triplicate, quadruplicate just today. But very, very good. So this was the 3rd annual regional day. I encourage folks next year. I know there had been some things about the executive committee, just some background. Normally, the executive committee, it's Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill does not have a delegate on Central Pines because it's coincides with their meeting night. So they have a representative. They're not eligible for executive committee, which is how come I needed to have that conversation with the Carborough rep. It just took several weeks before we finally were able to communicate. So I will be representing on the executive committee. I'm trying to think, and for the Reentry Council, again, that was reconstituted. I shared a little bit. The bylaws have been now adopted, and so it will be a monthly meeting and initially as we reconstitute, and then it'll drop back to quarterly. And lastly, visited the diaper bank. I think Megan's also done that. I did not know it was the largest diaper bank in the United States. That floored me. 11,000 volunteers to keep that thing going. They were saying that it was 6 million diapers a year. The other thing that struck me was, there is no, of the actual product, diapers, formula, incontinence products and menstrual cycle products, there are no donations of product. Manufacturers don't donate. They have to be purchased. So that is where, bottom line, cash donations are absolutely necessary. In addition to the labor of packing and distribution, they distribute to 80 counties in North Carolina. And they are they've been tapped by the governor's office on recovery. It's part of the recovery and resilience. So yes, they were on the ground in Western North Carolina, still on the ground. They're still serving people from past hurricanes. So, an amazing operation and the largest warehouse being held here in Hillsborough. And they connecting them with some folks, to get additional support at state level. They're getting some support federal level, I believe, if my memory is correctly. And I think that's about it for right now.
Thank you, Kathleen. Ralph?
So we had a Parks Recreation, meeting last week, and the Parks Recreation Board is, finalizing, the Kings Highway Master Plan with the hopes to, bring that in front of us in the near future for adoption. Open Space is working on some cemetery wall repairs they're aware of or know about. There's a big tree that fell during Chantal down by Eno River Brewery that had the potential to float down the river and damage stuff, so they brought in a contractor to remove that. And then the last thing I have is I'm sitting on the committee for the intercity visit trip. And we have our second meeting today, trying to narrow down a future site for intercity visit. We're down to possible 3.
Yeah, possible date.
The dates are pretty much the same. I think September, whatever we've done the last couple of years. I don't think the date has changed. September.
What are they?
Usually around the birth.
Usually around my birthday,
Okay, that's terrible. So you're gonna have to help me out there.
September 20th-ish.
Yeah, usually that third
Third
week in
week?
September. So
I
that's
feel like we went in October one year. Am I making that up?
no.
That was the last one in September.
We did May in 1 year. We did May and September.
Nashville.
So are we considering Oxford or Fayetteville?
Maybe
I'll let it maybe.
April.
Okay, so my updates are, at a Chamber of Commerce, meeting on the 18th. And, a really interesting idea was floated, speaking of intercity visits. Do you remember? I don't know where it was, maybe it was Lawrence, Kansas, or maybe it was Boulder, Colorado, but we went to a place that had a business incubator.
And that was Boulder with the Techstars.
Okay, so that idea has been, rattling around in many people's brains ever since. And so the chamber had the idea to leverage county funding to Hillsborough to help start an incubator. Hillsborough, it turns out that the county ended that money, so it's not available. So it was a great idea and a lot of good thought. So they're going to continue exploring self-funding that, or maybe getting sponsorships to do that. But the concept is that the building the chamber is, the upstairs is not used. And so it'd be a great flexible space for, 6 or 8 people to be able to do that kind of activity, and have it, not only it's just space, but it's a program that goes along with it, with coaching and mentoring and other services. So to be continued. And also, the chamber is considering sponsoring collaborating on a workplace health assessment. It's a free opportunity for members to assess employee job satisfaction, engagement, work-related stress, and intentions to keep their businesses in Hillsborough.
I think they've released it. I thought I saw the link to that like today, yesterday?
I have not seen that yet, so, yeah. And then, Matt and I have Triangle West tomorrow. And community related things, I attended the Veterans Memorial Planning Meeting on the 12th. And Eric, I just got that letter on my desk tonight. I put that on your computer for funding, and I think the amount they mentioned in the letter might be a 2-year, not a 1 year.
Okay.
So don't get sticker shock on that.
Okay.
And then, Matt Eford and I have been, meeting with the county, Arts Commission and engaging the county commissioners on collaborating with the town on sponsoring being involved in our July 4th event. So I think we've kind of reached some level of, collaborative opportunity. And so I think maybe Matt, at the next meeting, maybe you and I will do a tag team update to the board on that. And so, yeah, it's in development. The actual agenda for that is still in development, but we do have the support of the county and the Arts Commission. And if anybody knows Greg Bell, who was the coordinator of the Ink Festival for Dino, like 20+ years. Greg is the brains behind the operation. So I feel really good that we'll have a very high quality event to talk about in the future. Finally, I wrote a letter for Jones Grove Missionary Baptist Church. Their 100th anniversary is coming up in a couple of weeks, so it's nice to reflect on their many contributions to Hillsborough and Northern Orange County.
I did forget one thing, and that was Megan and Rob and I were at the merchants meeting.
Okay, thank you. I was unable to make that.
No, it was very good. One of the things that that Officer Hooks was taking back to the organizers of the various sundry protests, and I spoke with some of the other organizers of the protest, is why you do your protest at the same day, buy local and translate that into dollars bought from our merchants, because that was a big deal, is that the merchants are seeing their customer base drop. They're afraid of the crowds. They're intimidated, so they're just staying away the entire day, and Saturdays being important. So if those, coming downtown to protest national also demonstrate, support our community, buy local, and downtown merchants do your buying at the same time, our merchants will not have an issue. That was a huge part of the meeting. I don't have the agenda. There were some other topics, but that was the big major
Great, thank you.
discussion. And just one other thing is, being that, Matt, you and Mark, being involved with Triangle West, take a look at AMPO, which is AMPO, AMPO, which is the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations.
Megan.
So it sounds like I've been to a lot of the events that I've been at. I guess the regional day, which was a great event. It was my second one. I can't remember why I couldn't make last year, but it was great. We also heard a lot about RTP, the history of it, where it started from, where it's grown, and the future of what we're looking at there. Also went to the diaper bank. It is an impressive facility, and what they're doing here in the state is great. Merchants Association, I had written down mentioning HPD was there. It was a nicely led communication about the challenges that the merchants are having on those Saturday protests. And upcoming, I've got TDA and tourism on March 2nd and 4th next week. So they have been pushed back because of the storms, and now we'll get together and meet. That's my update.
Thank you.
Yeah, regional day was great. I thought it was informative. Could not say for the whole thing, but stayed up till lunch. I agree the history of RTP was really fun. Mac Paul, who's writing a book with unfortunately Duke University Press. Should be very, very a fun read and just the change and the social changes that have occurred in the region. So I'm looking forward to that, and the data center presentation was also very, very, very informative. And my takeaway from that is a lot of things, one of which is it's a hot topic of conversation, usually tied up in AI, but us streaming our meeting here on Zoom is using data center technology, it's using data center capacity. And as the economy continues to change, those are going to be hot commodities. And just how do we, if someone were to approach a town like Hillsborough, doubt it, but just in case, how would we approach the conversation, especially with water and whatnot? So earlier this evening, I attended the Restaurant and Lodging Association for the Visitors Bureau, which was great. We had local restaurateurs involved in that. Our Visitors Bureau meeting was last week, and for the most part, what we heard was a report from Chris Kavanaugh, who we brought in to really help us apply a strategic direction, not necessarily a strategic plan, but things that we could do. Some of it's low-hanging fruit, some of it's not. One of the things that D.R. Bryan brought up was maybe the idea of 3 different ad hoc committees. One that I'll be on is about the structure of the Visitors Bureau, considering whether or not it should be a TDA and not set aside as an advisory board, that the board would have more fiduciary responsibility than it currently does. The other was, gosh, one of them was really boring, and I can't remember exactly what the ad hoc was, but the third one was Hillsborough related, which is just how the Visitors Bureau could be more encompassing of Hillsborough. In general, I opted out. I feel like Chapel Hill Carver need to figure out how they want to interact with Hillsborough. We're doing a pretty good thing up here. But it'll be interesting to see how those ad hocs go. As the mayor said, we have TPO. Commissioner Ferguson already preempted me on the governing body, because that came through the Orange Care Coalition. Could you just clarify, is what is NC 513? What is that? Is that a name, a placeholder name
I'm sorry
for the Partnership in Homelessness Restructure? Because the email I got just said NC 513. I'm like, that's very cutting edge, or it could be a placeholder text.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Some bigs happen on May 13th.
Yeah, I'm not, so the partnership, here's where the partnership gets a little confusing. Historically, the partnership has been a collaborative that has also operated as the COC. They're restructuring it as an actual board. It has always been a collaborative. They are restructuring it as a board and a formalized over the COC. So the collaborative part kind of.
Right, but what's NC 513?
I haven't
Just a.
It's one of the enabling, like, I have to go back and look.
I was just curious. I thought that sounds really cool, like a cyborg, or they just don't have a name.
I just have to go back and look, but it's, the whole restructure is actually not for NC, it's for federal.
No, I'm saying that the email I got
Oh,
called it NC 513.
yeah, I'd have
And
to go back.
I was asking for clarification.
Yeah, and give me 2 seconds, I'd have to look.
I also need to schedule the diaper bank. They've reached out. I just haven't been able to make it work. I also relayed Commissioner Ferguson to the league that I did not like how Hillsborough was put for the town and state dinner, and that I was not going because of that. And sent that to Rose Williams, who responded and said she would pass it on to the event staff for future consideration. And then on Thursday, I'm attending the Carolina Chamber annual meeting. So that's it.
Thank you, Matt. Anything else for the good of the board?
Adjourn.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a second?
Second.
Kathleen, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Have a good night.